Okay, well, we're playing musical chairs. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. Welcome to our December 13th meeting of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Board. Clerk, could we have a roll call, please?
Yes. Chair Rennie?
Here.
Vice Chair Harney?
Present.
Director Corrigan?
Here.
Alternate Director Yulo?
Here.
Director Griffith?
Here.
Director Sinks?
Here.
Director Gibbons? Here. Director Bruins? Director Craig? Here. And I'll note that Director Cortese, Director Miller, and Director Abikoga are currently absent.
Okay, thank you. So the first item is public comment, in which we allow members of the public 3 minutes to speak on anything not on the agenda. I don't have any cards. If you'd like to speak on agenda items, we have cards on the table over here. You can fill them out and hand them to the clerk. Will bring them up. So does anybody wish to speak on an item not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none coming forward, I will close the initial public comment and move to the consent calendar. Would any member of the board wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Director Gibbons.
Items D and E, please.
Okay, Director Bruins.
I had a clarifying question on H.
Yes, I had an item to add to H2, so if we can pull H off, that would be good.
Okay, so we'll just pull H off.
Thank you.
Would any other members of the board wish to pull any other items? Seeing none, would any member of the public wish to pull an item from the consent calendar? Seeing nobody coming forward, I will then come back and see if I can get a motion on the remaining items on the consent calendar.
So moved.
Okay,
So we're
And which
we're
are
moving all items except D, E, and H.
correct.
Okay.
And I had a second. Is there any other questions, discussions? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. Anybody opposed? Okay, it was unanimous for those that are present. So let's go back to consent calendar 1D, which was pulled by Director Gibbons, yes.
Thank you. Is this on? I can never tell. So just a question on the schedule of final outcome on page 10, page 46 of our packet, page 10 of the item. It talks about by the end of the process, we will have produced X, Y, and Z recommendations. I thought the goal was to have recommendations as soon as possible.
That is correct. So if we have recommendations that come up in as soon as January, we would bring them to the board. We don't want to wait on those.
Right.
But we did, so we could amend the language to say as soon as possible, but certainly by the end of June was the intent there.
It's up to the others, but I thought that was a very important comment that we all wanted to have happen and have the group be flexible on. So that was my comment on item D.
Okay.
And if there's no other.
I would like to address this item as well.
Okay, let's go with Director Sinks first.
So I had a discussion with Don before this, and I mean, where I'm coming from, with every one of the commissions or other bodies we as elected officials appoint to advise us, I'm used to this being important enough that my city staff or the agency's staff directly engages to do this. Paying a facilitator that has no particular experience in energy programs, $225 an hour plus travel time from his home in Mill Valley seems to me like unnecessary. I would rather have staff directly do this. So I'm not supporting this, and I wonder if you want to add any. You knew this was coming, sir, and I didn't know if you wanted to talk to this or
Yeah.
you had more thoughts about this.
Thank you, Director Sinks. I think I'll yield to Alan for his response.
Good evening. This was, we actually proceeded with this based on recommendation from the board last time we discussed this. But
To
also
hire a facilitator?
Yes. But we also agree with that simply because having a facilitator as a third party, it will ensure impartiality to the program that we are proposing. We will be involved heavily with this committee. This is not where the facilitator is going to meet with the committee and then bring us a report. We will be deeply involved in the contents and the preparation, as well as in the process and the format. The facilitator is really designed to be almost an impartial, non-biased to all the proposals, and then brings the group together for some consensus. And we made sure that the facilitator itself is not deeply experienced in any energy or for that purpose as well.
Well, so if the board voted and there was a majority that supported a facilitator at $225 an hour plus travel time, forgive me, but that sure wasn't my recollection, and maybe I missed it. I would point out to my colleagues that, on no commission or committee that my city or Air District or any other agency has do we do this sort of thing, except, there are circumstances for facilitators. We have a big contentious issue. We're dealing with a lot of members of the public, and there a specialist is called for, I think. But on something like this, where we're formulating programs with a group that, is working on this month after month, I don't get it. So that's what I would say.
Some
to
other
this item.
CCAs actually have a full-time NFTE doing just managing the
Well, I would
community
point out
group
that
as well.
with all the events we're going to hear about later that we've tabled this year, if we don't think we have enough bandwidth, I would respectfully think that could be handled by interns at something much less than $225 an hour. Thank you.
Okay, so Director Bruins, I think you were next.
So, thank you, Director Sinks. I share your concern. So I'm not sure why we are, even if I agree with having a facilitator, I'm not sure why we can't get a local facilitator, someone who's going to commute 53 miles in order to get here and then back seems a little bit ridiculous unless we were looking for some very specific skill set. So I don't understand why we can't get somebody local if we are, in fact, going to get a facilitator.
We did, this was an RFP, actually. We solicited proposals, and this was the most reasonable as well as competent in providing this service. So it's not outside the range of the proposals.
But did we not have any local proposals?
Yeah, we had a local proposal as well.
Okay.
This was more competitive.
Okay.
We had two proposals?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay, so, yeah, I guess with the RFP, I'm not even sure, are we required to go out with an RFP on this versus calling up a local people that we know that that facilitate meetings at a lesser rate here in the Bay Area?
For the amount that we did not require to have a full-blown RFP that come to the board, it was more of a solicitation with contacts.
Okay, so I'm with Director Sinks on this one. So and then one other question so I can understand the structure. So we're putting together a committee. Is this committee going to be electing a chair and a vice chair for their body?
We haven't decided on all the mechanics of the committee yet, but most likely, yes.
So for me, I'm just going to say I'm not supportive of hiring a facilitator and assuming we have to have a facilitator for this entire process. If we want to have a facilitator, if we want to let this group come together, charge them, let them pick their chair, their vice chair, and have a staff, liaison, I'm for that. If we feel like we need to have a facilitator to kick it off, I'm for that. And I'm not sure, whether or not you get a cheaper rate. I mean, I just went and looked at, the last time we had a facilitator for our city council, and it was $200 an hour, and that was for one event. And so, with a contract like this and going for $225, that just doesn't seem like it makes sense. So, I'm not ready to go for a facilitator for the full duration. I'd rather us get this thing started off and seeing what this team needs in order to be successful so that they can achieve the objectives that they want. And particularly when it doesn't require any specific expertise other than meeting facilitation, which again, I would think a chair, if you're electing a chair, the chair is leading that meeting. So I'm not sure where we're going with this.
Okay, Director Gibbons.
So I have a very different take on this. I am very supportive of this. I do recall having at least 2 conversations about having a facilitator for this group. It has come before us several other times. And it was discussed as being a full-blown facilitator. Some of the rationale was that it is not something that the staff has time to handle. It's going to be a commitment that right now we have a very lean staff, and it made sense to me that staff was proposing to have this facilitator. It is a very diverse group, and we said at the time, we were struggling with what the role and the scope of this group is and how it's going to come together. And the idea of having an impartial person to work with the committee to help them get organized, to help them understand, and work as a liaison to staff as to what they can come up with and what's appropriate. It made a lot of sense to me. This is not like one of our commissions, like a planning commission or a park and rec commission. This is not community issues. This is a broad range of new ideas, new topics, new people with no history. And I don't see how we could go wrong by giving them the opportunity to have some structure and support to be successful, because our goal is to have this group be a functioning working group across a wide range of community representation. And I just think they need as much help as they can get, and I'm very, very supportive of this.
Hey, Director Sinks, did you have a question of staff? Okay for now?
No, I'm sorry, but thank you. I've made my remarks. I mean, I do think if staff is overburdened, they could let go of some of the tabling and have interns do that at $20 an hour rather than $225 an hour. Thanks.
Okay, Director Corrigan?
I'm not sure if this is on. How about now? The light's on, but I think we have to hit. It's on? Should I just use my mom of 3 sons voice? Okay, so I fall somewhere in between. My concern wasn't the $225 an hour as much as it was the $35,000 overall. And so I, in my mind, fell more in line with what Liz was suggesting, was that we were going to have this facilitator to help them initially get off the ground. But it was the tail end of this thing that's had me a little sideways looking at tonight's report. So I am in support of having, and if it's the best person for the job, I'm going to defer to staff and not micromanage that situation at $225 an hour, but I would limit it to a certain number of hours up front, get this committee up and running, and then if that is the will of the committee to come back and say we can't survive without ongoing facilitation, that's something I would want to have a second shot at that point.
Okay, so let me see if any members of the public wish to address us on this item. I obviously don't have any cards. I don't see anybody coming forward, so I'll close the public testimony portion for this item. Director Griffith.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and weigh in on this. You know, I just off the top of my head, VTA, MTC, any number of other agencies have citizen advisory committees out there. I'm not aware of any of them using outside facilitators, nor am I aware of any of them ever having a concern about needing this to be managed by someone impartial. We have an advisory group that, among other things, consists of former elected officials. I think they are perfectly capable of understanding staff's biases and working within them, because every other agency does as well. I'd also add that I personally consider this important, that SVCE's staff pick this up as a core competency, because this is not going to be the last one we do. In fact, we're looking at forming a permanent citizen group after this. And frankly, if staff doesn't have the capacity or skills to manage that group, that's a problem. So in this particular issue, I understand there are going to be some startup difficulties in forming it and deciding what the structure is going to be, but we've got people that are capable of doing that because they've worked in structured environments before. I think we should have staff become good at doing this. So I'm actually inclined to support what Director Sinks is saying.
Director Abe-Koga.
Thank you. So I agree with what Director Griffith mentions, and I was actually thinking, like, I've been in facilitated meetings done by internal people and external people, and sometimes when you have an external person who's not really familiar with the internal workings, it becomes really challenging. And given this group, there are some who are going to be brand new to this, I actually think it would be better to have staff take charge of the group. But, I think a compromise is fine. I'm willing to go with that. And if you want to have the first meeting, the organizational meeting, like a retreat type of meeting to get everything in order, and you want to use an outside facilitator for that, I think that's fine. But I do agree that I think this is something that staff can take charge of and should take charge of going forward.
Okay, I'd like to ask staff if they have any response they want to make to this.
This contract is designed with a not to exceed, and it could be on as needed. So if it needs to be where some of these meetings are coordinated and facilitated by an outside facilitator, and then if they are running very well later on, we can limit. We don't have to spend all that, but we will have a facilitator ready to actually do these things. We thought we're acting on the direction of the board, and we are actually providing a true impartiality to assemble these ideas from our customers and to bring them into some kind of consensus that would work much better than a staff that would do that. But if that's the wish of the board to have the staff do it, we will do it either way. There are some other CCEs that dedicated a whole FTE to run an actual committee. So we will come back with additional staff anyway.
So you feel like you have the bandwidth and the skills to pick this up if it was the will of the board to deny
We have
this?
the skills, we don't have the bandwidth.
Okay. Did I see Director Yulo?
Hearing from the other board members as well as staff, I think an in-between approach might make sense, and I would move that we approve an agreement with this firm not to exceed $20,000 with the intent that they would set the groundwork for this committee, as well as in a train-the-trainer kind of mode, set the groundwork for future advisory bodies and subgroups that we may have.
Okay, did I see Director Bruin's hand?
So I will be voting no for this particular one, even no matter what you do, because this whole idea of an hour commute to get here for simple facilitation, again, I can get behind us hiring a local facilitator. I think, we went through an RFP process. I think we could have just as easily asked for each of the, asked some cities in terms of what their experiences are with facilitators, and could, somebody recommend a facilitator. I totally object to a 53-mile commute. That's an hour of travel time in each direction on a good day. And being in the transportation side of the house, that's optimistic if it's only an hour each way.
Not for an evening meeting, it wouldn't be an hour either.
I don't think we are paying $25 an hour for a commute.
But I don't want to pay for the commute at all. I think I think we have a lot of local resources that would be just as capable in terms of facilitation. And again, if we want to I'm supportive of bringing a facilitator in for as on the as needed basis. I just don't think we need to do this type of a contract with someone traveling this far with no necessarily special skills. And I think a lot of local facilitators aren't connected in terms of looking for RFPs, et cetera. A lot of them are in the word of mouth kind of approach to things. So anyway, I will be voting no for this particular contract.
Okay, I saw Director Sinks with the next desire to speak.
So I wanted to follow up on the idea that we don't have enough bandwidth. Why would staff not have enough bandwidth to pursue the board-appointed program committee?
We have...
It's one meeting a month, plus some staff time that I'm presuming staff has to be engaged with us in order for it to be successful.
Yes.
The facilitator has no experience in this, does he or she?
in utility or engineering, they have some experience, yes.
What experience would that be?
They're more experienced in bringing strategic thinking of people together and creating consensus and facilitating a group.
So I'm trying to get to the core issue and why this is important to you, because it seems to be. Is it that we don't have the expertise in-house? Or is it that we don't have the bandwidth?
We have expertise, may not be as well in creating in running these kind of committees, and we may not have bandwidth simply because we are actually very thin as far as staffing.
So, I mean, it just occurs to me that later on we're going to get a presentation on all the tabling you've done, all the community events you've been at, where you've had folks, you know, explaining to folks who come up, you know, to booths and events what's going on. Surely this would be of higher value in terms of using staff time than that, wouldn't it?
It is of higher value,
we're
but
thin?
it's a different skill. It's a different skill set.
Would it help the board on this conversation to say we would be fine to have this for 1 to 2 meetings to start off with, just to help us get this thing going, and then from then on we wouldn't need the facilitator?
And most of the outreach events actually is done by interns and fellows. They're young interns that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I may have let this process get a little out of control. We had a motion, but did we have a second?
No. No.
So did anybody want to second that motion?
I would second it.
Okay, so now I can continue. And I believe it's Director Gibbons' turn to speak.
So I honestly think we have to be cognizant of the fact that we did give staff direction to hire a consultant, a facilitator to do this, and we did have this conversation earlier on. So I believe that a facilitator for this type of a group is a specialized skill. This is not like facilitating a council meeting or a retreat or anything. This is trying to draw out what the group is interested in. It's all new. It's someone who has the expertise to draw out of the group what it is they think they want to do, what it is that they want to be able to contribute, how they want to participate in Silicon Valley clean energy. And I feel very strongly from my professional background as well as my political background that there is an expertise involved. I'm willing to compromise and support an initial effort, and then if the group wants to continue with support, that they can come back to us. I think $20,000 is a good place to start. We need to get this off the ground, and staff is saying that this is not something they've got the bandwidth at this point in time, and perhaps not the expertise, which I would be inclined to agree with. Then I think we need to move forward. We need to support this process and this program, and do what we said we were going to do.
Okay, Director Griffith?
Thank you. My understanding is this committee is going to be a Brown Act governed committee, which means as every Brown Act governed committee I've ever seen, there's going to be a chair and probably a vice chair. The chair is going to be the one that runs the meeting. Staff is going to have to be present anyway to provide the staff input. Frankly, I just don't see the need for any kind of facilitation, because after they elect a chair and a vice chair, granted, it's kind of throwing you into the deep end, but hopefully they will pick a chair who has experience in these meetings. I know of at least one person that's being proposed to do this who's been in that environment, so I'm not that worried about the expertise. I'm just struggling to find any value add in this at all, particularly since staff already has to be present at the meetings.
I mean, it is the model that we use for every city, commission.
Everywhere, you know, and
every single one of them.
Every meeting is going to be governed by a published agenda that the committee has to follow, public input that has to be done at certain points. It's not like this is a bunch of people sitting in a circle just kibitzing and coming up with things. It's a committee. It's a Brown Acted committee. You know, we should be able to handle that just fine, and I don't see any value add to facilitators, so I will not be supporting this motion.
Okay, any other comments? Seeing none, I'm going to call a question.
Could you restate the motion, please?
Okay, so the motion, perhaps Director Eula should restate it.
I'll do my best. The motion was to proceed with this consultant agreement with a cap of $20,000 with a specific eye towards the consultant doing work that would lay the groundwork for this committee and future committees. In other words, training our staff to get advisory groups up and running. So, establishing ground rules and the other things that groups may not, a group of wild citizens, if you will, may not be normally accustomed to. I realize, Director Griffith, they're not all wild citizens, but you understand. So the idea was just to sort of, for this one time, to put together a process that our staff could follow in the future.
Okay, any further comments?
Well, briefly, I won't be supporting this motion either, for what it's worth. For the same reasons that Jim stated.
Chair Rennie, I would suggest this time we do a roll call, just because if there's a divided vote, we do need to have 7 votes to pass the item. So just so we have a clear record as to whether it passed.
Okay, so are there any other comments on?
I'd like to make one.
Okay, Director Corrigan.
So it is my hope that this would be perceived, rather than a not to exceed, specifically to use for the consultant, this would be perceived as an investment in this subcommittee and its importance to us. And that the money, I'm hesitant to support the current motion as it stands, because I'm much more comfortable with a cap of $10,000. I believe we could probably do that with 2 meetings.
Do you want to suggest an amendment?
I'd really like to suggest an amendment if you would entertain
It'd be
one.
pretty long meetings at $10,000.
Yeah, but here's my concern. We're in the weeds here on a topic that I think we need to move on. So I'm happy to vote even at 20, as long as I can go on record at this moment saying my hope is we can get this accomplished for far less than that, and that the additional monies that we've set aside could be used and invested wisely in this subcommittee, should they deem other costs necessary to succeed. I think the outcome of this committee is crucial to the success of SVCE.
So I think the Vice Chair was interested next.
Yeah, I've been listening to all the comments here, and I tend to agree with Director Griffith here that this should be done internally, but what I'm hearing from staff is we have a bandwidth issue here, and that as our committees and as we do more public outreach and get more discussions going with the public, we're going to continue to have this problem. So I'm not going to support this motion simply for the fact that I don't think this is the right approach to solving the problem. I think perhaps the right approach might be to hire a contractor for a given period of time, bring him on staff without benefits, and for maybe a 6-month period or a 3-month period until we get this issue resolved. So that's why I won't be supporting it.
Okay, so I think I should probably call a motion because I don't think we have 7.
I'd like one more clarification from staff.
Okay, go ahead.
Staff says we don't have the bandwidth, and I agree with Board Member Griffith. Staff has to be at this meeting. This is a Brown-acted meeting. Staff is going to have to be there. So is the issue that you can't even physically be present for this? Because now I have a major concern if that's the case.
No, we are planning to be at all meetings.
You're not planning to be at all
We
meetings?
are planning
Okay.
to be at all meetings, yes.
And then the other thing is, just for clarification, is there something we got a specific individual we're talking about. I'm hearing people thinking, okay, maybe we need to bring this person on board because it'll help us train our own staff and help us all of this stuff. Is that in this guy's wheelhouse? I mean, facilitating a meeting is totally different than trying to how to successfully create committees. So is it even in this?
We are entrusting this committee with millions of dollars, and we are actually hesitating by spending some to create a good consensus, good feeling, good cohesive decision-making among this committee. I highly recommend that we can make that investment to get a good outcome from that committee. However, we can do what the board.
So let me ask.
Jump in. You should. Go ahead.
So is this person that you want to hire? Are they going to be preparing material to help get through meetings? Are they planning any workshop meetings where it's not necessarily facilitated by the chair of the people in the committee? I mean, when you call it facilitation, so most people think, you know, we're hiring somebody to sit here and do what I'm doing, which, as you can see, doesn't take much skill.
Okay, so Pamela Leonard, I am Community Outreach Manager. I just wanted to address some of these comments since I've previously brought the CPAG items to the board, and we discussed bringing in a professional facilitator who can strategically bring together a diverse group of individuals with very mixed expertise, as you'll see when that item comes up. A sense of urgency that we were given in having a consensus quickly with this group. We felt that we really needed to find someone who doesn't just run a meeting. It's beyond that. It's they're able to utilize their strategic processes that we actually found to be quite compelling, which is why we selected them. And so that was the intent. We are fully aware that we will need to be present. We are planning to actually create a syllabus. Also looking at some other CCEs, we've seen that in their longer-term customer advisory groups, it's taken 6 months just to get through initial training and getting people up to speed, and we don't have that kind of time because we really don't feel like climate change can wait, and we want to get these programs rolling. So that was the intent that we had discussed, but again, we're open to the direction from the board.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? That looks like no, so then I will call the question. So all in favor? We need a roll call vote, so roll call vote, please.
Are we voting at 20,000 or my friendly amendment?
I haven't heard anything about an amendment.
I would accept the amendment if the seconder will.
I would not.
How about 15?
No,
Okay.
no.
So the
We're
motion-
spending,
Let's
Sorry,
go.
mate.
Call the vote.
we're talking about
Let's call a vote. We don't need
$4
to.
million.
Yeah.
Let's go.
So we're at 20,000 with the other added verbiage. So roll call vote, please.
Director Corrigan,
Yes.
Alternate Director Yulo,
Yes.
Director Griffith,
No.
Director Abikoga? No. Director Sinks?
No.
Chair Rennie?
Yes.
Vice Chair Harney?
No.
Director Gibbons?
Yes.
It fails.
Director Bruins? No. And Director Craig?
So I'm sure that fails.
Yes.
We need 7, not a majority of who's here, we need a majority of the board to pass this, correct?
That's correct, so you need 7 to
Yes.
pass.
Okay, so that motion fails. Director Griffith, would you like to give us an alternate?
No, I'd like to make a comment. I'd like
Okay,
to point
please
out
do.
that one of the CPAG nominated people it actually has training as a facilitator. Tara Martin-Milius does. I'm not sure this is even necessary.
Okay, Director.
Can we just move on?
I concur with that. I mean, unless somebody wants to make another motion, let's move on.
So I'd like to have a motion to say no. Would somebody like to? Director Corrigan.
Yeah, so I guess my concern about that, if we're going to have a little more dialogue about this, my concern about that is having a committee. You can see how difficult it is with this many people to have a conversation. And that's my concern, is putting this many smart people in the room who each have their own agenda, who come to this along with our staff trying to achieve an outcome. It's difficult. And so my concern is having even one person at the table who may have the skill set to be a facilitator, may somehow usurp or control the meeting in a way that is not exactly what at least I had in mind for all of these individuals to come together and try to find consensus. I'm not saying that's necessarily the outcome. I'm saying it's a concern I have. So I would be willing to make a second motion, significantly reducing the overall cost, not to exceed, at $10,000, but to proceed. Mark?
Okay, so I have a motion and a second for a $10,000 not to exceed. Anybody want to say anything, or should we try this motion?
Yeah,
I
you know
would
what?
point out that that represents 40 hours roughly at $250 an hour.
Director Bruins?
So I will still be voting no. And let me give you a counter proposal. I agree. You know, all of us, it's we all know who's going to be appointed to this committee. I'm assuming a positive outcome on that vote. We do have somebody who is a trained facilitator on there. I mean, I would prefer us, prefer us to even consider whether or not we want to be appointing who we want as the chair of that. I believe, even if we don't want to appoint I would be happy to say we should be appointing the chair, and I would also be happy to say that given that we have somebody with a skill set, and I'm looking at other people on there, speaking for a couple of other people who have effectively been able to manage these types of situations, then if the committee, through the committee chair, determines that they would be better served by bringing in a facilitator, then the motion tonight would be to direct staff that should the chair and the committee wish to have a facilitator, that the staff is authorized to go hire somebody by the hour to come in and do the facilitation.
Not to exceed
I
10,000?
mean, well,
And then that way, that doesn't necessarily bind us to this $225
it doesn't
person.
bind us to anything. It is a matter of, the thing is
deal with
I would
that.
prefer to have faith in the committee
Sure.
and not set a tone that we can't trust that they can figure out how to reach consensus on diddly squat. And if they need help, they will ask for help, and we will provide the help that they need. So that would be my
I can
preference.
live with that.
So you'd like to amend that and accept that amendment? So it would be not to exceed 10,000 based on the committee saying that deciding that they need a facilitator.
I think a better way to phrase it would be to allocate $10,000 to this committee in the event that they need it for this purpose. So that if they don't need it, it doesn't get spent.
And seconder's okay with that? Okay, Director Gibbons.
I think we're still missing one of the core decision points, is that the staff doesn't have the bandwidth to do this.
We don't have a choice.
Well, I think
They
we
gotta-
do have a choice.
They got to make the bandwidth. This committee can't function without staff. It's
All
a
right.
Brown
So-
Act
so-
committee.
So
I
let's.
don't understand.
Well, my point is that I understand it's a Brown Acted committee, but I also understand that it involves preparing minutes, preparing all the staff backup that's required for this committee. And I was understanding that I think the term facilitator has gotten us goofed up. We are really having someone who is, I'm going to call a strategic planner and a structure, to help structure. If you read some of the scope that's in the contract, it talks about building the team strategy for the overall process, discussing making rubrics based on the input and guidance and overall processes. It's really a process-oriented facilitation, for lack of a better word. It's a structure. It's trying to help a group be structured in a way that meets what we are doing. And I am saying that we're talking $4 million and we're talking $10,000. This group has got to be successful in a short period of time. I think we're being super in the weed, penny wise and pound foolish. I just don't see where staff is going to be able to do this. I think I felt that that's the role of this person, was to develop and do all this documentation and pull all this material together and really manage the group, whether it's,
So
but
I'm
not,
just
it was
gonna
not
point
going to
out-
take staff to do that.
Respectfully, that vote's already failed. Let's move on. Let's call for the vote
Yeah.
at 10 and see if we
That
can
would
get it
mean
to
stop
pass. If
talking.
not, we need to move on.
All right, so I'm going to.
I can still comment.
Of course.
Okay, so assuming nobody else wants to comment, I'm going to call for the vote. I guess we need roll call vote again, please.
Director Corrigan?
Yes.
Alternate Director Yulo?
Yes.
Director Griffith?
No.
Director Abekoga? Director Sinks?
No.
Chair Rennie?
Yes?
Vice Chair Harney?
Yes.
Director Gibbons?
No.
Director Bruins? And Director Craig?
All right, so that one's going to pass.
Could you, just for the record, could we make sure we restate what that motion is clearly, I mean, we just took a vote, and I just want to make sure, because within a certain amount, I can change my vote if I was not clear on what the motion was. So can somebody restate the motion?
Would you like me to do it?
And I don't know who.
Yeah, Director Corrigan.
I'm going to have to paraphrase, but the intent of my motion was to allocate $10,000 to the subcommittee to be used as they see fit to facilitate their meetings.
Okay, everybody's happy? Let's close this item now that we're 40 minutes in on the first consent item. Next on our list is consent item 1E, which I believe was also pulled by Director Gibbons?
Yes, thank you. I guess my comment on this one is a technical one. Should this be pulled until we have an updated presentation from staff based on the email we received this afternoon?
Thank you, Director Gibbons. We will have momentarily a presentation on that. However, this implementation plan, we'd like to approve it tonight and send it out tomorrow morning.
It's independent of the discussion we're
correct.
going to have? All right, thank you.
Move to approve.
Okay.
Second?
Okay, any further discussion? All right, so
Public comment?
would anybody from the public wish to address us on item 1E? Seeing none, I'll close the public comment. Any more questions up here? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote, the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Seeing none, passes unanimously with everybody present.
Good.
Next is consent item 1H, moving along rapidly. This was pulled by Director Bruins and our council.
Oh, so let council go first.
Just wanted to clarify the purpose of this. Right now, the selection of the chair and vice chair is set in the operating rules and regulations, and that does require that a special procedure be followed, which is introduced at one meeting and then adopted by resolution at the second meeting. And we also have something called an annual meeting, which is when you actually appoint your officers. So we also will be changing the annual meeting to February. And the last thing is that we do need to give this to the board 10 days in advance of the meeting. So you'll see the actual amendment will come your way at least 10 days prior to the meeting, so you can see what is being changed in the operating rules and regulations.
Okay, and Director Bruins, your comments?
And so I guess I was trying to figure out because our next meeting is going to be on January 10th. So are we concerned that by January 10th we would still not have, okay, then do we have any guiding things in terms of qualifications for the chair? My concern is you can be appointed chair in February and then you're termed out with the election in November, and then, I'm not sure what we're really gaining so much on that. I will support it if that's what everybody wants, but I'm just not sure exactly what we're gaining versus, trading off a front end for a back end problem.
Director Abe-Koga?
Thank you. So Mountain View does our reorganization in January. It'll be on the 9th, and then the mayor decides the appointments. So it takes a few days to get all of that in order. So we wouldn't have anyone appointed on the 10th.
The city of Los Altos Hills is the third Thursday, same thing in January. So it may make more sense to actually push this to March.
Okay, other comments? Director Bruins?
I was just ready to make the motion
Okay,
to.
Director Gibbons, did you want to
I
comment?
was just going to say that this motion is the result of experience from last year. It was lesson learned that was recommended by the board.
And I would just make the comment, it's kind of about, do you want your new directors to be making the choices or the old directors?
That's also the case, right?
No.
Until a mayor appoints a new, the current directors are the directors. So, you could make a case that maybe January is better because then you have experience. But, okay, so yes, some of us could roll off, right?
Okay, Director Bruins, go ahead.
I don't know.
I will go ahead and make the motion as it was presented to us in the consent calendar and see where that goes.
I second.
Okay, Director Griffith, you want to comment? Oh, okay. So would any member of the public wish to address us on this item? Seeing nobody coming forward, I'll close the public comment. Okay. Any other comments up here?
I have one
Go ahead.
question for those of you that rotate later. If there's an election in a particular year, when I guess next year will be that year, when are new council members appointed? They take their seat in January, okay.
December.
December, yeah, it's early December for us, so it's just interesting that we're all a little different. Yeah.
Okay, so I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Passes unanimously with everybody present. Okay, so moving on to the regular calendar, I had a request from our interim CEO to do his executive committee report because two of the items do affect, two items that are on our agenda are affected by it, that there's some last minute changes that aren't affected in the staff reports. It would be good to go ahead and let him do his executive committee report first. Does anybody have any objections to that? Seeing none, go ahead with moving item number 6 up to next, please.
Is it 6 or
Item
7?
Sorry, 7.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last Friday, we had some regulatory things that happened that affects SVCE as far as the Milpitas implementation, as well as the timing of the rates from PG&E. To go through that, I yield to Hillary.
Hi, everybody. All right, let's see. Thank you. Do we have the...
Yes, if you could please pull up the presentation. Thank you.
All right. Everybody loves last-minute Friday news items, right? So, so last Friday on December 8th...
Hillary, can we try and adjust the microphone? I don't know if we need to angle it up, pull it closer to you.
Let's see here. How's that? Better?
Better.
All right. So last Friday on December 8th, the CPUC released a resolution. A resolution is a standalone policy vehicle that has no predecessors. And basically, it sets out new regulations for the implementation plan CCA registration process. So we're looking at basically as a change to the current process, which is a rolling 90-day process in which CCAs can implement or can submit their implementation plans at any time during the year, and the Commission has 90 days to comment on those and certify them. We're looking now at a standardized annual cycle by which new or expanding CCAs are going to have to submit their implementation plans by January 1st of each year in order to begin service by the 1st of January the next year. So first, just sort of a quick rundown. It was released on the 8th. It's currently scheduled for a vote on the 11th, on January 11th at the Commission. If it can be amended at that meeting, but basically if it passes there, it will go into effect immediately. And the basic premise of this, which we're going to go into in greater detail in a minute here, is that this is designed to sync up the implementation plan certification process with the resource adequacy program, which, as you guys know, is basically the premier reliability insurance program in the state. So this kind of, it dropped suddenly, but the Commission's ability to do this stems from a very old decision. So back in 2005, Decision 5-1241 is basically one of the foundational decisions that implements AB 117, the law that authorized CCA formation in the state of California. And this decision gives the Commission the authority to establish timelines and procedures for certifying CCA implementation plans. Yeah. So this has been used once before to develop the current process that we went through with our original implementation plan. But basically, the past year has seen an explosion of new CCAs, as you guys know, and the justification given here is that this surge in new CCA growth merits a revision of this process. So what this resolution does, it's more a change in timeline than a change in submission requirements. So we're still looking at the implementation plan, the bond, the registration packet. We have to submit all the same things, but on a different timeline. So you have the implementation plan has to be in by January 1st of each year. And then following that, you have RA load forecasts, which currently are due in April and August. Traditionally, the way it's worked in the past is CCAs have not submitted these RA annual forecasts until the first year in which they are actually in service. So these forecasts are due in April and August, and a couple months later, after receiving those load forecasts, the CPUC will release the resource adequacy obligations for that CCA for the coming year. So for example, we went into service in April 2017, and in 2017, that's the first year that we filed year-ahead RA compliance for 2018, which we did in August and then just finished that up at the end of October. So essentially, what this resolution does is it forces CCAs to participate in the annual resource adequacy year-ahead load forecasting the year before they go into service, instead of the year that they are actually in service for the first time. It also adds a meet and confer process with the IOUs while after the implementation plan has been submitted, but that is not expected to be disruptive. There are no specific outcomes that are required from that process, so that's not really the most hot button part of this resolution. But here's the actual timeline. So first of all, you can see this, the blue rectangle looks at the first 90 days after implementation, after the implementation plan is submitted, and those 90 days don't really change. So before it was done on a rolling basis, this time it has to be done by January 1st. But we're looking at basically the same steps happening. But then if you look at the right side of the timeline, and I should have mentioned, this is pulled directly from the resolution. On the right side of the diagram, you can see that now we have specific dates attached to the first RA forecast submissions. And some of these other steps that were before happening kind of on a rolling basis that could happen basically interchangeably depending on when the Commission and the CCA were able to collaborate to get them done. These now have to happen in a specific order. So essentially the way this ties into the resource adequacy program and the justification that the Commission is giving for imposing this is that, so resource adequacy compliance takes two forms. We submit monthly resource adequacy compliance and purchase monthly to meet our obligations. And then there's also year ahead resource adequacy compliance. So basically what we're doing now for 2018 is we just got our final, as you know, we discussed this recently at past board meetings. We just finished our 2018 compliance, and we will be able to submit monthly filings throughout 2018 to ensure that that compliance does happen. So what the Commission is concerned about is basically the idea that if CCAs do not have to file year-ahead compliance until the year that they are actually in service, then for the first months that a CCA is in service, before it's entered that first year in which it's doing year-ahead compliance, that CCA load is being counted twice. Basically, the CCAs are doing monthly compliance, but that load is still part of the IOU's year-ahead compliance for the previous year. So for example, in 2017, what they're concerned about is that we were doing monthly compliance, but we were still part of PG&E's 2017 year-ahead resource adequacy compliance plan. So they're worried that basically this is causing cost shift onto bundled customers because the IOUs were procuring RA last year for 2017, and we have been procuring it this year in 2017 on a monthly basis. So there are a couple key dates that are in this resolution. So it went into effect immediately in that if this is passed on January 11th, it applies from the date that it was released. So basically all CCAs that do not have their implementation plans submitted before December 8th, when this resolution was released, will be governed by this new timeline. They will have, in order to go into service by January 1st, 2019, these implementation plans will need to be submitted by February 1st, 2018. So we will be within that window, basically. We fall in this very brief window, as do several other CCAs around the state at the moment, of not having our implementation plan submitted by the 8th of December, but before the 1st of February. So if this passes as written, we're basically looking at a delay in serving Milpitas until, from May of 2018 until January of 2019. And for those, for CCAs who submit after February 1st, they will be forced to wait until January 1st, 2018. Or sorry, 2020. Thank you. So what are we doing about this? A number of things. Basically, this resolution is inappropriate on a number of levels. We just this fall, in September, opened a new resource adequacy proceeding designed specifically to develop and institute structural improvements to the resource adequacy program. So there's concern about double counting, wherein a CCA's load could have the IOU procuring RA on a year ahead basis and the CCA procuring RA for that same load on a monthly basis, can absolutely be addressed and looked at in the RA proceeding. A resolution is a very shallow policy vehicle that does not allow for hearings, for evidentiary briefs, basically anything that will allow us to debate this question and develop a record. The data that the CPUC claims shows a cost shift onto bundled customers is currently entirely confidential. We are not allowed to see any of that. So we're working on this on a number of fronts with CCAs across the state. We're working on data requests to get a look at some of this data that proves that this cost shift exists. We are working on comments. Those are due on December 29th, right in the middle of the holidays. But we, SVCE, is working on comments. CalCCA, we're coordinating with CCAs at various stages of development across the state to show the impact this can have on these communities. I am organizing ex parte meetings with the 5 CPUC commissioners' offices, and I'll be reaching out to you guys once we have those scheduled. Basically, we're organizing as many of those as possible, and we will be having a rally at the commissioners' meeting on January 11th, if that item is not pulled from the calendar before then. So we are intending to try and get it pulled before it even comes to a vote, and we have a number of strong arguments to that extent, but if that holds, then we're going to hold a rally and see if we can get them to vote it down on the 11th. So that is where we stand. This was very sudden, and I think that it's entirely, even if there is a basis in the RA argument, this is an entirely inappropriate vehicle in which to pursue it. And we will be making that point very strongly at all levels at the commission.
So, Hillary, this also, to me, smells like PG&E trying to increase their profits, because the way the RA market works, especially for us, PG&E is holding most of the RA in the area that we have to buy. As the RA gets close to when it needs to be used, the value of it decreases. So this is a way for PG&E to make sure that you're forced to buy it far enough ahead from the only guy in town at whatever price they want. And there's currently, as far as I can tell, no way to limit how much they can charge for RA. So it seems inappropriate in other ways. If it were to go through, we need other ways to control the market manipulation of RA prices.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why this should be addressed in the resource adequacy proceeding, because that is a much more comprehensive discussion that has, for example, room to talk about those types of concerns. I mean, another thing that you could do is ensure that the IOU load forecasts in the year ahead do take into account planned CCA launches, such that if a CCA is going to be buying RA on a month-to-month basis for part of the upcoming year, that gets excised from the IOU's year-ahead compliance forecast. So there are a number of ways to approach this, and yes, I agree. There would be, if we're going to have CCAs participate in the year ahead before they launch, there would need to be other provisions alongside that to make sure that the market is equitable.
Any other questions from directors?
Yeah.
Director Sings?
So we heard from at least one expert, some of us did, that in asking, what can we do about the fact that there does seem to be market manipulation with resource adequacy, given that, yes, PG&E is the incumbent and they have it all, or they have much of it, right? And in this shift, it seems like the clever mechanism they're in cahoots with on the CPUC is to delay everything But could we go, actually, instead of constantly playing defense with these people, could we go ask Jerry Hill or others to carry a bill for us? Or suggest that we would put in a bill that basically says we want an open auction on a monthly basis for RA capacity. If you got it, you put it in on some fair basis. It just seems to me that, we end up playing defense over and over and over. RA is a regulated thing, but there's no market making going on for it because there's only one or two effective sources. I mean, would it not make sense for us to say enough's enough? We're going to fight at the CPUC, but we're also going to go on offense for a change in the legislature?
I think that in this case, it depends. This runs into sort of the line of what should be dealt with in the regulatory sphere versus the legislative.
Yeah.
The reason
I realize you got to try at the
Yeah.
CPUC. I understand that. It just seems to me like they want to get their nails, the CPUC wants to get their grip on us. I get that. They want control. They're feeling loss of control. But honestly, this is just a delay tactic, and it's a shabby one at that, and that they're pulling it with no notice in this way. It seems to me that it's time to send them a message somehow, other than by directly going to their hearing.
Yeah, I think that on this particular resolution, you're absolutely right. I think on the RA issue more broadly, I would say basically because we just opened a new proceeding in RA that, as far as we've seen, is open to broad, comprehensive conversation on how we can improve the RA program. I think that basically doing an end run on open regulatory processes in the legislature is something that we have been confronted with before. We've been on the opposite side of that. And I think to try and sort of, I think basically we should give this new RA proceeding a chance to produce something productive.
Well, in the meantime, there will be a lot of CCEs that are delayed in forming, particularly in Southern California, where we need political clout.
Well, to be clear, on this resolution, we should absolutely pull out the stops, and we will be. But I think on the question of reforming RA more broadly, to sort of avoid this potential double counting that the CPUC is ostensibly worried about, that we can and will argue that that should and could be resolved in the resource adequacy proceeding.
Well, I really appreciate your thoughtful response. I know you work at this as a professional every day. I'm not trying to second guess you.
Oh, no,
and
no.
You want us to go to San Francisco or Sacramento, we'll be there. Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? So I guess, Dawn, the reason we presented this is it affects the Milpitas item. Any wrap up on that?
Yeah, so we're going to move forward with the implementation plan next month. At the next council meeting at Milpitas, they'll pick the board representative to be here in January. And we want to move forward as if everything's on schedule. I think we have a pretty good strategy to beat this. We'll keep you apprised of it.
Can I assume we're filing tomorrow?
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll get that on the record, and then, we'll know in short order how soon we can move on that.
Okay.
Oh, and
I did have a question.
one
Okay.
other item. Sorry, I realized we have, there's also been a news item in the ERA forecasts, which will affect our rate discussion for later tonight, which is that we learned this past week that the PG&E ERA decision is going to be delayed until January. So we're expecting a proposed decision on that on the 18th next week, and it will be voted on also at the January 11th commission meeting. So the new PG&E rates will not go into effect until March 1st, 2018. That includes the PCIA and all the other generation rates, and those will now be adjusted to be amortized over 10 months instead of 12. So that will not, that won't necessarily change our broad methodological conversation, but it'll change the schedule a little bit.
And so we'll keep that in mind when we get to the rate setting discussion on number 3. Director Yulo, you had a question?
I did, Hillary. On the resolution, going back just a second, if this resolution had an effective date of July 1st, would it be more acceptable then?
Is in if like basically implementation plans could be submitted by July 1st.
Yes, or
in order
pick
to-
a date in the future. It just seems so sudden. Obviously, it's like pulling the rug out from people who are making plans. But I was wondering if the methodology is potentially a rational one to start with.
I mean, one could also argue that you could start it next year and say that the first time this is going to be implemented is for plans submitted by, February 2019 instead of February 2018. I think that, generally speaking, I would be inclined to say that we should scrap this vehicle entirely because the problems with the RA program can be fixed in the RA program structure without changing the rolling nature of the CCA implementation plan process. I think that has been good for CCA so far in terms of accommodating the different rates at which communities are able to sort of bring together the resources needed to launch a CCA. But definitely the severity of it is increased by the fact that it's effective immediately. But I think the strategy we're going to be taking is that this should be entirely rejected entirely.
Thanks.
Okay, so other items in the CEO's report you wanted to cover?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, we did send out a letter a few weeks ago to the Air Resources Board to continue that process of being eligible to receive credits for energy for electric vehicles. Also, we had our inaugural Watts for Launch, WATTS. It was very well received with our commercial and industrial customers. Speakers included Tesla, PG&E, BMW, Genentech, and Google. And we'll probably do that on a triennial basis. And just a few other announcements. We'll be sending out press releases tomorrow regarding Milpitas joining us based on tonight's decision with the implementation plan, as well as announcement of our new CEO. We were waiting for the approval of the employment agreement tonight. And also want to thank Director Corrigan for joining Hillary and I a few weeks back, meeting with Mark Berman, and went very well. We have his support for next year. And that concludes my report.
Okay, so let me open the public testimony portion of this. I do have a card from Bruce Carney, if you'd like to step forward and address us, please.
Hi all. I'd like to thank Hillary for yet another outstanding presentation. We can now add December 8th to the list of dates that will live in infamy. I'm very connected to the CCA advocacy community up and down the state, and I have not heard a peep about this before. So this is hitting my radar screen now for the first time. I see an enormous threat, quite intentionally threatening, I'm sure. And I will do what I can to alert the advocacy community to file comments with the CPUC before, what was it, December 29th is the
Yes.
December 29th deadline. Unless you think that would be a bad idea, and if that is the case, I would certainly love to get that feedback so I can cool down and not try to get people to take action. I can only imagine what this will do to San Jose's program, to other programs that haven't really gotten started but have hired staff and are beginning to incur expected permanent expenses. So yes, it would be great if overwhelming victory was ours on January 11th. I will mention that date to the advocate community. We'll try and figure out if it's San Francisco or Sacramento and get people there. So thanks.
Questions for Mr. Carney? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Would anybody else wish to address us? I don't have a card from anybody else. Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public testimony.
I just have one comment.
Okay, go ahead.
So I extracted the letter out of the packet. I sent it to John Joya, who sits on the CARB board. He happens to be up in Sacramento. They're doing a big scoping meeting for how to get rid of greenhouse gases across the state. And he said he's going to raise this with Mary Nichols, who's chair, or she's the executive director of CARB. So thank you for getting that done. Okay?
Okay, Director Griffith?
Yeah, I'd just like to suggest if this is going to potentially delay Milpitas, we should reach out to Milpitas and get them engaged in advocacy.
Great point. We did actually send out the the data that we have tonight to Milpitas, and then we'll follow up with them tomorrow.
Okay, so we're ready to close the CEO's report, which was item number 7. So we're finished with item number 7. We'll go back to item number 2, which is our Customer Advisory Program Group staff report.
So we have for you tonight the list of the appointees to the CPAC committee, and we have the picks by the board as well as by the CEO, total of 15 people. And some of them may be in the audience tonight, I'm not sure. But so we're asking for approval of the applicants to join our inaugural Customer Program Advisory Group.
Okay, any questions from the board? Okay, seeing none, I'll open the public testimony. Would anybody like to address us on item number 2? Seeing none, I'll close the public testimony, come back to the board for any other questions, motion, discussion.
Move to approve.
Okay, I have a motion and a second from Director Abe Koga. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Passes unanimously with all those present. That was nice and quick. Okay, so
Could we ask anybody in the audience who just got appointed to stand up so we can give them a round of applause and to say thank you for stepping forward?
Sarah Martin Milius.
Thank you.
Don, stand up.
Thanks so much.
So thank you to everybody who did apply, if anybody who's listening to this, but I do appreciate everybody who did step forward. This is really important to us.
I was just curious, how many applicants did we get in total?
33.
Okay, so we've taken, what,
third?
About half of them, because we have a total of 15, 16?
15.
15, thank you.
okay, so let's move on to item number 3, which is our, our methods for adjusting of our 2018 rates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's rates part 2. Yield to Don.
All right. Thank you, Chair Rennie, and good evening, Commission. As you heard from Hillary, we had a little bit of a curveball come our way on Friday last week. We had been moving towards putting together a very detailed methodology for how we might update rates. We put all of our projected rates into that. We're ready to share those tonight, but it now appears that those aren't going to be exactly the right numbers anymore. So what we'd like to suggest maybe is that we move quickly through the basic structure that we put in place to familiarize you with that. I think with the help of several folks on the staff, we have a good set of models now that we can put the actual 2018 rates from PG&E into, and that we can use to make good decisions when the time comes. And in terms of timing, it will likely be that we could have another discussion like this in the February timeframe when we know pretty much what the likely rate changes are going to be for March. And remember, you heard Hillary talk about the 10-month amortization of 12 months worth of PCIA, for instance. We'll have more clarity on what that's going to look like. We can make structural decisions in February, and then in March, decide on the actual rates after we've seen PG&E's rates on March 1st for actual implementation on April 1st. So just to lay out a general timeline there.
So
we have a question, I guess, on
I'm
that.
just confused. Is there still a value in having the longer discussion tonight if we don't know what the numbers are?
It's obviously at the board's pleasure. We can show
I really wanted your perspective.
Well, I think it would be useful to show you the 3 scenarios that we went through, and just to get your general reaction to that. I don't think it's worth having a long discussion of the sub-scenarios and the exact numbers, but I do think it would be useful to talk through the 3 main kind of structural approaches we took. And you recall we had a long discussion on this last time. I think that was actually fruitful, and I think the ways that we have to look at it here are going to be helpful. You don't have to decide anything tonight. We don't have to decide on any exact numbers.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, moving forward. So you recall from last time that our base case, and I still think this is going to be generally true for 2018, is that the PCIA is going to go up and PG&E generation rates are also going to go up. And the net effect is that we'll probably see a slightly bigger spread between our rate plus PCIA if our rates were to stay the same in 2018 and then what we have now. So we might see an increase to maybe a 3%, 2 or 3% differential versus the 1% that we've had this last year. But the key thing to understand is that we're going to see some differences by different rate classes. We may see certain customers with a little wider benefit, maybe relative to PG&E, and others with a narrower benefit or potentially no benefit at all. So we have to come up with a process that will accommodate that. You asked us to look at 3 different scenarios. The first was a scenario that would keep rates where they are, keep our 2017 rates where they are, unless they don't meet a certain savings percentage versus PG&E, and we went through a scenario of 1% savings. Some customers would save more, but every single rate component and every rate would be at least 1% below PG&E. And we looked at a couple of flavors. We looked at a 2% difference and a 3% difference as well. The second scenario was to absorb all of the PCIA increase, so to lower our 2017 rates across the board such that with the increase in PG&E PCIA, the customer would be paying exactly the same thing net next year as they are this year. So we called that rate scenario absorb. The third option, the peanut butter approach, was just to take the new rates from PG&E and simply discount them by 1, 2, or 3%, similar to what we did this last year. Now, if we did that at 1%, the same percentage we had this last year, rates would go up, our generation rates would go up across the board, and we'd see a pretty substantial increase in our operating margin. But we'll describe that scenario when we get to it. You also asked us, and this was, I think, an important set of questions that you had last time, to look at our different rate schedules and how many of them there are and what the impact of those rate schedules are relative to our revenue in general. So these are the most populous, if you will, rate schedules and the ones that have the biggest impact on our operating margin. The ones with the green arrows there are the ones that we sort of played through our scenario analysis. The E1 rate is the residential tiered rate that applies to almost 200,000 or 4/5 of our customers. If we look at the A1, that's the small commercial rate, and that again has a large number of customers, almost 18,000. And then the E19 is the large commercial rate, which has only 1,200 accounts, but it comprises 25% of our revenue. And you can look up and down this list. It's kind of an interesting list to look at. But as we think about rates for 2018, especially if we're not using a peanut butter approach, it will be useful to see how our rate schedules affect these, how our rate increases or rate changes affect these different rate schedules. Okay. Lots of detail here, but we'll just take you through the top line. Again, this was the scenario that we looked at our last meeting, taking a minimum 1% approach. Some rate components would be lowered by more if we maintained our 2017 rates. But maintaining our 2017 rates or lowering whatever we had to lower to stay at 1% below PG&E would realize about a 3% on average, 3.03% delta versus PG&E next year. We'd have to increase 0 of our rates, we'd have to decrease about 31 rate components. Again, that's of approximately 180. Looking across to the right at the E1 tiered, A1 small, and E19 large, our savings relative to PG&E for residential would be about 1.7%, but it would be higher for the commercial rates, about 2.77 for small commercial and 4.01% for large commercial.
Don, can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
The first, not the first column, but the second column, the operating margin impact,
Yes.
is that compared to our forecast, or is that?
It's compared to our current budget.
So this scenario would provide us with $13.2 million more.
Correct.
Than we're planning on currently.
Correct.
Thank you.
And what is that baseline, if I might ask?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
What is the baseline surplus that we expect to generate?
Yeah, our baseline was about just a shade under 40 million. In
A
net
shade
margin.
under 40 million with Milpitas, without Milpitas?
Without.
Without Milpitas. And with Milpitas, it would be?
Figure on adding another 6 million to the bottom line. with
Okay, so
Milpitas.
either around 40 or 46?
Correct.
Or 39 or 45, something like that is the base.
And these
Thank you.
numbers are with or without Milpitas?
These are without. These are without Milpitas. Yeah, that, Director Velo, that second column is really the punchline. So as you look at all the impacts going across the board here, that minimum 1% approach would result in a $13.2 million improvement in our operating margin for next year if all of the underlying, and so this was the option we talked through last time. Again, there was concern about the differential nature of the savings between residential and commercial, which is what gave rise to looking at some of these other alternatives. Just moving quickly through these, if we absorbed PCIA, this one is, comparatively speaking, more expensive for us, though it would still add about 1.6 million to our operating margin for next year. But moving across the page, you can see that it significantly increases our average savings relative to PG&E across all rate classes in the 5.72 to 6.36 percentage range. So we're opening up a pretty big gap relative to PG&E's costs, and you can see that right below that is the 0% line. In other words, no net change in cost to our customers across PCIA and our gen rate. Okay, lastly, the peanut butter approach. If we look at the 1% for 2018, what's interesting is about the fourth column over, we would have to actually increase 148 of our rate components for next year to stay 1% under PG&E. And we would lower about 31. So this would involve increasing a lot of our rates. Of course, it expands our operating margin even more, up to about 20 million more next year. And you can see going over to the right that, again, the savings is 1% across the board relative to PG&E across all rate classes, but our customers are going to be paying generally 5 to 6% more because we really are kind of following PG&E up the rate increase ladder, if you will. So these were 3 different structural options we looked at, and on your own time you can look at how varying some of these percentages, 2 and 3% on the min scenario or 2 and 3% on the peanut butter scenario, changes the numbers. And again, all these numbers are going to be a little different when we get into the actual 2018 numbers, but structurally you can kind of see how this works.
So questions on this table before we move on? Director Sanks?
Yes, so I wanted to clarify for the column that says SVCE 2018 gen rate increases and decreases. Is this net of the PCIA? Does it include the PCIA on top of the gen, or is it only the gen rate?
This is just our gen rate. The PCIA is going to go up as well, but these are our posted rates. These are the rates we control. We would be increasing. Now remember, we had laid out a general policy that we were going to try to keep our rates the same for next year when we first established rates in 2017.
So the all 3% under seems pretty good, but if it doesn't include the PCIA, it's not really apples to apples with what we're currently doing, which is 1% under, right? When we set up our rates, we said we want to be 1% under bundling in the PCIA. So effectively, our customers were paying 1% across the board.
Yeah, perhaps I misunderstood your question. So this is the same approach we're using this year. So in that respect, this does factor in PCIA. But when we talk about the SVCE gen rate change, we are changing our gen rate. The PCIA rate is also changing. And then when you put those two things together, that's how we get to that 3% savings relative to PG&E.
So if we are going -3 compared to PG&E's expected rates, and I realize this is all preliminary because we can't really do much until they, I mean, it's probably not the right thing for us to be reacting until we have specific information from them. But if I was to ask you to tell me how many customers of ours, if we did go with a -3 policy for everybody, how many of our customers would experience a net increase from what they're paying SVCE plus PCIA? In other words, if I bundle those two things, I'm not asking.
No,
if I bundle those two things together,
yeah.
Which is how we did the -1 this year, and I'm looking at, do any rates go up if I include the PCIA in the calculation? Is anybody paying on net more than they would be if we're -3?
So if we look at the bottom row here,
Yeah.
which is this 3% peanut butter approach, or everybody's going to be 3% less than PG&E in 2018.
Which includes the PCIA.
Right. So over on the bottom right corner, the top row is percent savings SVCE versus PG&E. So that's 3% for each of the different rate schedules, because that's how we've designed it. But at the same time, the customers are going to be paying 3.56% more. Residential customers are. Small commercial, a little less, 2.89 and 3.5.
But once again, the table says customer generation rate. So what I'm asking is, if I take customer generation plus PCIA, are they paying yet more?
I'm sorry, that should, what we mean is the overall generation cost to the customer. So I can see the confusion on it. It does include
the
PCIA, correct.
I see,
Yeah.
okay. So just apples to apples, instead of $100, an E1 tiered residential customer under the all 3% plan would be paying $103.56.
Correct. But that's a 3% savings relative to what they.
No, I
right.
understand.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And
I think I got it. Thank you. It's confusing, right, because of the PCIA.
that says 95% people would
Number of people.
So there are 180 rate components across 40 different rate schedules. And what that says is we'd be raising about half of those rate components under the 3% scenario, and we'd be lowering about half.
And when it says gen rate increases at the top of that column, does that also include the PCIA?
No, those are SVCE
So it gets even,
gen.
we see something even more dramatic if the PCIA was factored in on that column. Instead of 95, it could be 120 or something. Goodness knows.
Well, in other words, yeah, if we put those two things together, it's going to be pretty much all of them, because the PCIA increase is significant.
Okay.
But our commitment was to keep our generation rate before the PCIA, because
Yeah.
that's the rate we control, it's the rate we publish.
No, I understand.
To keep that steady.
I was looking, I mean, we had some discussion about equity between residential and commercial customers. Clearly, the staff recommendation at min 3%, right? Certainly could look more advantageous to commercial customers, but I understand, given the promise, why you're making the recommendation. Thank you.
Right, we don't raise any of our generation rates, we lower 84 of them. It's quite equitable, I mean, within a 1% band, less than 1% band across the three important rate schedules. So that was the thinking. It's not worth going into a whole lot more detail on the numbers, but that was the approach, and we wanted to share that.
Okay, Director Bruin's question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the purpose tonight shifted from, trying to pick something to really probably, I would say, the most value we as board members can give right now is now that we've seen, they created a model, and thank you very much, because I was the one who said it'd be nice if we had this model, so thank you guys. But now that you see this model in play, okay, so now it's in play with a hypothetical, are we happy with the model? Is there something that is there a scenario we want to see that's not on here? I think that's really the question is, do we have the scenarios that we want to be able to see so that way when they come back with numbers plugged in that are going to be more real, then we can sit here and say, okay, now we know which scenario, which one we want to go with. So I personally can't, I'm satisfied with these, the approach that you took, which was probably more extensive than I was expecting, because I didn't expect this all one, all two, all three, so I'm happy with the scenarios.
Are you finished with your presentation?
Yes.
Okay. Director Gibbons, did you have a...
I'm just going to echo Director Bruin's comments. I was, one, impressed you understood us from the last meeting. And two, the way you transcribed it into these schedules was extremely helpful, and I think it accomplished its job. So thank you.
Director Yulo?
Similarly, I think this is excellent, and I agree with the staff rec as the best of the options. And I had a question. The fact that it's amortized over 10 months is going to cause, if I understand things correctly, it's likely to cause their generation increase to be higher and the PCIA increase to be higher. Yep. Which of those is more important? Like, are we likely to be in a better off or a worse off position?
So I've asked myself that same math question, and probably people smarter on math than me up here, but I think it's going to net out pretty similarly.
Good.
I think that what's going to be more challenging about this, I think, is just it's going to make the numbers look bigger in general. The customer is really not going to have much of no impact at all to speak of in January and February, and then they're going to get a higher increase for the remaining 10 months. Yeah, I just don't think it's fortunate that this is happening. So it is what it is, though. We'll react.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me open the public testimony. Would any member of the public wish to address us on this item number 3? Seeing nobody coming forward, seeing no cards in front of me, I will close the public testimony. So you don't really need a motion or an action on this one. Just comments that we're generally happy with being able to choose from these scenarios. And I guess we understand that PG&E isn't finished changing their rates, and so if we chose minimum 3 that showed it within 1%, that could change because they don't just adjust everything equally up and down. They might decide to do more of this kind of thing. But generally...
Yes, when their numbers come out, they could be different again, but we have a framework that we can
So based on this latest schedule that came out last Friday with the delay in rates, this became more of a discussion item than action.
Okay. Any further comments from board members? Director Sinks?
I'll just say I agree with my colleagues. If we were doing this tonight for January, or we were doing it in January for February 1st is, I guess, the flavor that we had going. Based on this data, right, it seems like staff recommendation would be appropriate, but Obviously, now that you've got all this model set up, it's little work to bring us a new table, so it's going to have to be responsive to whatever actually happens. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Director Craig?
Just one comment about posting this to the public and making it as easily understandable as possible. I've gotten comments a few times that people still don't understand how to figure out what they're really paying. Are they really saving money? How are they saving money? And this chart that you did here was very good, and something like that going up on the public website I think would be very useful.
Okay.
Okay, other comments? All right, so anything from staff? Seeing none, I will close item number 3. Move on to item number 4, which is review our audit and finance committee structure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So last June, when we formed the Finance and Audit Committee, one of the motions that was approved by the board was we would allow alternates to be part of the Finance and Audit Committee that were not members of this board. But then looking back at our finance policy number 1, where we do reference the Sarbanes-Oxley for defining the structure of our Finance and Audit Committee, we realized that we cannot, under that structure, have alternates that are not members of this board. It's best practice to follow Sarbanes-Oxley in setting up our Audit and Finance Committee meeting. So when we had our inaugural meeting back in November, it was the recommendation of the Finance and Audit Committee members that we would not have alternates that were not board members, and actually we would follow the same structure we do with the Risk Oversight Committee as well as the Executive Committee, and not have alternates at all. So tonight, what I'm asking for is just approval from the board to follow the Finance and Audit Committee's recommendation to not have alternates, or if you're going to have an alternate, it has to be a board member. But in this case, we really just want to have the 5 members committee to be the same structure as the Risk Oversight and the Executive Committee.
Okay. Questions from the board?
So are we actually taking action on this then?
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and start it off by just making the motion for option number 1.
Second.
Okay, so let me make sure we open up the public testimony. Would anybody from the public wish to address us on this item number 4? Seeing nobody coming forward, seeing no cards in front of me, I'll close the public testimony, come back for comments. Director Sinks.
So I don't know how many of you have audit committees in your city. My city does. It's comprised of 2 council members and a bunch of 2 or 3 others who are typically CPAs, really smart, not on the council. I don't know, do you have similar structures in your cities?
We do.
And actually, I actually think, I don't know what, I know about Sarbanes-Oxley from the private sector. I don't know what it's doing here. I would simply offer the idea that having people that are used to working with auditors that are, have that background and certification and training has been so enormously helpful for those of us on the council who are lay people. Unless you have that background and you know what to look for, we're dealing with a lot of money, and I would sure like us to not abandon the idea of having those expert outsiders that know the right questions to ask of the auditor. And so I would need to hear more about this whole, why this is so foundational to the committee. But my inclination, just based on my city experience, is, boy, that outside finance expertise, to appoint an auditor, to hear from the auditor, to ask the right questions. We actually had some issues in the city of Cupertino, I will say that. And it was those folks who are active CPAs or had accounting backgrounds who had the means of asking the right questions. And we all learned a lot from those outsiders. Thanks.
So when the policy was adopted here, I believe it was the Sarbanes-Oxley requirement was put in there only as a good practice, and many agencies do follow that, but it's not required. So again, that does apply to private corporations. So that's your judgment. You would have to, if you're going to get rid of the requirement, though, of all board members being on the committee, we would have to change the finance policy number 1 in order to accomplish that. So, which can be done. So, what I may want to do here is, one thing to do in the meantime, if you could follow the recommendation of the audit committee for right now, and then come back with another report from staff as to how the whole committee may be restructured.
Well,
and then then at that point in time, there could be a draft new policy for you to adopt that would change the makeup of the committee at that point.
Yeah, whatever we need to do. I'm interested in hearing from my colleagues, though, about how they think. We'll figure out the mechanics to do it, but I'm interested in hearing from my colleagues what they think about this idea. Thanks.
So I'll just comment, since we recently changed our finance committee, being a 5-member council, we have 2 council members on our finance committee, and we decided to add 3 citizens that are all very, very, very knowledgeable in finance, but we added them as non-voting members. So the 2 council, they sit and ask questions and so forth, but when we actually have to make a motion and vote on it, only the council members get to do the voting. But of course, we listen carefully and deliberate and so forth. So it really allowed 3 very smart people to be part of our discussions, and I'm finding it very useful. Other comments? Director Craig?
At the library JPA, the finance committee is made up by board members and a city manager. All of the meetings are noticed, and all of the information is put out before the meetings, and we have had people show up and give us some comments on the finances. Luckily, it's usually nothing major, but the information is out there, and we do welcome any of our constituents to come in and comment on the finances, and it's been working pretty good. I've been on the board for about 5.5 years now.
Director Corrigan.
The city of Los Altos Hills has a finance committee that has, I'm not sure the exact number, but it definitely exceeds 8, probably closer to 9 or 10 members. In addition, the city 2 years ago mandated that it always have the vice mayor and mayor serving on the finance committee and attending those meetings when possible. Obviously, you can't make anybody go to a meeting, but that they actually don't vote. The committee members themselves vote, make a recommendation. The council members bring the recommendation back to the council, and then we vote on it, which we felt protected council members from being viewed as already being biased or having a clear statement on a recommendation before it was heard in a full public proceeding, although the finance committee meetings are public as well. So that model works extremely well for us. Like you said, we've got some really brilliant minds that do all kinds of investment strategies and CalPERS calculations that far exceed the capacity of any one of our council members. But I think to our attorney's point, this is, tonight all we're discussing is, should we allow the 5 people we've already appointed to this committee to have alternates? And that I'm pretty clear on with Commissioner Bruins. We don't need to do that tonight. And I think we can allow the committee to, as the entire organization matures, start to address how we're best served by members of our community.
Okay, so let me open this up to the public. Would any member of the public wish to address us on this item? Seeing none rushing forward, I'll close the public testimony, come back for motion, more questions, discussion.
Question, I think.
And who was the second?
Me.
Okay.
Could I add a friendly amendment?
Ask her if she's the motion.
Well, it depends. Let's hear it. On a friendly amendment, I'll tell you after you agree.
Well, that we give direction to staff and the committee to work on a process to bring in some outside financial expertise and amend our financial procedures, bring back to the board the necessary
amendment,
language amendments, changes, whatever, to affect that.
So my preference would be no, not to do that. I'm happy
Okay.
after we vote on the motion, though, to put out a statement in terms of giving some direction to the finance committee that we already have to deliberate on this and determine whether or not the body would be better served by doing a different financial committee structure. But I would not want to put it as part of the motion. I'd rather do it as direction afterwards.
Okay, any further?
Yes.
Director Gibbons.
Thank you. I just for the record, Campbell has a budget of about 65 million, and we have 2 council members at the discretion of the mayor on our finance committee, and that's all we do. We don't have any outside people, but as just as Montessorino does, Director Craig said, it's a public meeting, it's noticed, anyone can come and participate in the discussion. So that's fine. I'm going to take a stab at Director Cortez's comment earlier on that he was the one that specifically requested that he have a finance person from one of the cities, and he was suggesting the county finance director to sit in his stead. That's how this came about. Just keeping in mind that that was something that was important to him at the time. And I have no problem removing the Sarbanes-Oxley requirement if it isn't a reasonable requirement for us to do. I have no problem with having outside participants in this. So I would be supporting the motion.
Okay, other comments? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Looks like it passes unanimously with all present. Did we want to make any other motion?
No, just so, and then I would like to also ask with concurrence from my colleagues up here that we give direction to the Finance Committee that they discuss or give consideration to our discussion tonight and come back with a recommendation at some point to this body.
Could I ask a technical?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, go ahead.
Is this not one that you would like a motion to waive the second reading to come back?
No, because this is only it was only a motion made on to comply with the policy.
Okay.
So there's no need to change. We're not changing any policies and not adopting any ordinances at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
I mean, I don't know if we ought to vote on this or not, but I would be very supportive of that. I think it makes a lot of sense.
And I would advise that, because, I mean, given that some of you guys are on that you also maybe do and understand what each of the cities kind of do now and look at various models. But then, like I said, come back with a recommendation.
Is anybody opposed to that idea? No. Okay, seeing none, then I think we can probably close this item and move on to item number 5. Approve the scholarship fund for e-bike competition.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in this item, we actually have an action item to approve allocation for scholarship funding from our budget, and also to overview this program, I'll yield to Pam.
Good evening, directors. Pamela Leonard, Community Outreach Manager. I'm here to bring you some fun stuff. And I have the pleasure of introducing Kelly Hoagland. She's one of the Climate Corps Fellows that we hired based on an approval from September. And Kelly was brought on as a Community Outreach Fellow in order to lead some kind of community engagement activity that we would be able to engage our community very quickly in a very positive way, bring a lot of positive media attention to what we're doing, especially important since we're sort of delayed on some of the programmatic offerings that we have. So I want to introduce Kelly and an idea that she's come up with to engage with our students, and this is her project.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so the school engagement activity that I'm going to be discussing with y'all tonight is going to be a high school competition for students to build an e-bike. And so the name that we're calling it is going to be Bike to the Future, sort of a play on the Back to the Future movie. So the basic premise that I'll go more into detail about is going to be a competition for students to design and build their own e-bike in teams. And we're inviting all the schools within our service area. And as the first year, we hope to build this in the coming years to, have it grow and be something more recognizable.
Sorry, we're having technical difficulties with the slideshow. We need to advance the slides.
Should I wait?
Sorry.
I'll just continue.
I think we're doing okay understanding you.
Okay, cool. So first and foremost, an e-bike, if you don't already know, just a simple definition, it's basically just a regular bike that can also run on electric power as well as pedaling. So most people call it a pedal assist. And similar to an EV, it has to be recharged once the range runs out. So in researching other energy-related school competitions, e-bike competitions were pretty few and far between, so it's a really unique project for students to participate in, and also sets SVCEA apart from others as well. Obviously, it encouraged the use of alternate transportation, which we all know the twofold benefits of improving personal health and environmental health. And this competition, perfect, is also able to strike a balance between design possibilities and having a wide variety of e-bikes displayed, and also challenges for the students to think critically about. So next, I'll talk about engagement for SVCE with the community. So this is going to provide SVCE the opportunity to provide, obviously, scholarship dollars, which is what we're asking to approve tonight. It's also going to be a creative yet challenging STEAM learning experience for students. And it also allows SVCE to take advantage of some strategic partnerships within our serving areas, such as the VTA and other biking initiatives. So next, I'll just quickly go over the criteria for judging, which we really want to emphasize that it's aimed to emphasize the technical design over athleticism, because we don't want it to be about who has the best athlete. We want it to really be a STEAM-focused project and be equitable. So the 4 that we have right now are going to be acceleration, a very simple obstacle course, testing the range of the e-bike, as well as the students presenting their e-bike to our judges. And we're also planning on having other supplemental awards so that every team hopefully gets represented, such as a Spirit Award or an Aesthetics Award, and so on and so forth. And we also are going to recruit e-bike enthusiasts to be a mentor to the teams. We're coming with the assumption that most teams don't have a knowledge base of e-bikes, so we want to make sure that we help with that. And lastly, each team is going to receive a registration packet that has rules and guidelines to ensure that they're going about it in a safe manner, and we're also going to provide helmets and the necessary materials. So the scholarship award that we're going to be awarding to the winning teams are going to be incremental. So first place, $5,000, and then the second place team, the team as a whole is going to be awarded $3,500, and then third place is going to be $2,000, and that adds up to a total of $10,500. And a really rough timeline for you guys, we're going to be doing school outreach and registration in the next 2 months, and then from February to April is going to be the main building months. And lastly, the competition itself is going to be held the first week of May. So that's it for the presentation, and last but not least, you guys are invited, obviously, to the main event. Oh, and if you know any educators or students themselves who would be interested in participating in this, I would definitely want to be connected to them. So I put my email there as well.
All right, thank you for your presentation. Let's see, any questions? Director Gibbons?
I was just going to say, are you aware of the youth commissions that most cities have?
Yes, and Campbell's already expressed some interest in potentially hosting, so I challenge all of you if you want to grab the attention of this event.
Okay, Director Corrigan?
It's Kelly, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for being here tonight, Kelly. and outstanding presentation. So I am, by way of background, I'm a parent. I have 2 kids at a charter school with a makerspace, and I have another child at a school in San Jose that has also got a robotics team and makerspace. My concern about your timeline is, if this is going to be some sort of classroom activity, it would be in direct conflict with the curriculum the current class has already got going on. So what I'm envisioning here from what you've said is that you're picturing after school activity or a robotics team or a club or a youth commission binding together to form a team that will work on this design. Is that what you had in mind?
That is, yeah.
Okay, so when you say look for schools, you're not looking for classrooms per se, you're looking for schools that would help you promote it to their students?
That's correct.
Right,
yeah.
okay, great. And then the money, the awards would go directly to the team itself for students to use as they saw fit, but not to a classroom or to a school or to their science program or anything like that.
The award is for the students
Okay,
themselves.
great. So I really came sort of going, it seems kind of narrow to focus on this bikes alone or e-bikes, but I really like the way you made your presentation, and I think there is some real value here in the cross-pollination with other agencies and what's going on right now in terms of STEAM in schools. This is a really interesting idea, and I like actually how focused it is as opposed to being broad. So I'm willing to support it, but it did cause me to have a kind of a larger conversation in my own head about how we might support STEAM programs in our general service areas and offer classrooms or programs, science programs, funding to work on other innovative products that involve electricity in some capacity. So thank you for being here tonight. Those are my comments.
Director Gibbons? No, okay. Director Sinks?
Yeah, so thank you very much. I think it's a sensational idea, but I happen to be a mentor as well as a judge for FIRST Robotics. And what happens this time of year after a fall of training and prep is a lot of the high schools that you would solicit to do these things, dealing with all the same things, batteries and power systems and control and all that stuff, they are going to be consumed come the very first week of January until about April, May, when the competition goes. I could see this being really effective done next fall, say, because I think then, right, this could be a training exercise for those folks that are inclined to want to do these things. I'm afraid that if you follow this timeline, you're going to be conflicting directly with that program, which is many of the high schools in Silicon Valley have 100 or more team members that go out for this FIRST Robotics thing. The other questions I have, but I love the idea. I think maybe if you simplified it to say everybody starts with the same stock bike and then adds to it, I think you'd have a lot of challenge in having people just build the basic bike frame. And I'm wondering if it wouldn't be appropriate to allocate more money when we do this so that you could supply each team with a stock bike and then they could go from there to add all the electronics and everything. So that's one thought I have. I'm thinking, to supply materials is going to take more than a $10,500 budget allocation because that's what you've put in for awards. My other question goes to, with all these organizations that are doing things, robotics, things on wheels, things that are powered, that have substantial battery, right? Safety is a big concern, and liability is too. So at first, there's a whole ethic and culture and safety committees and all of this stuff. I'd want to be sure that we as an agency had liability and were covered both for all of those we had solicited to do this, right? And there was an agreement and understanding that was well drafted and signed by each one of these teams up front. And second, when we do the competition, that we get some real expertise in to ensure that we've created a safe environment and we're not setting ourselves up for an accident.
Can I?
Staff response?
Yeah. So safety is our #1 priority. That's why there's no downhill challenge. But we also made sure that we checked with our attorney and have waivers already drafted. That would be part of the registration packet because that is a very big concern, and we did look into that already, and we should be covered.
And so what do you think of the idea of actually asking for more money so you would provide starting materials?
So we originally were planning to work within our already approved budget through the marketing because we've already set aside sponsorship funds that are to be allocated in each of our communities for various events and festivals. So we were already expecting to run this through the approved budget. But should we see a need to alter that, or perhaps the mid-year budget is when we would maybe bring back any changes that would help supplement the competition, but I think for now we were planning to be able to run this as a marketing engagement activity.
Okay, Director Yulo?
So I guess to be clear, the $10,500 was just the award money, not the total cost of the program.
Correct.
I guess I had the same concern about the timeline that you've previously heard. So I would just say that let's be flexible this time and see if it's possible in this timeline, and maybe the first one is a smaller number of entrants. And I think it's a great idea. I'm really excited to get our name out there associated with this. So I also would like to point out to Director Gibbons that there's a small company in Morgan Hill known as, what is it? Specialized Bikes, yes. So we might be able to come up with a
Find
team.
some bikes.
We can't come up with a member of the Citizens Committee, but we can maybe have a bike.
Sweet.
Director Corrigan?
I'm just going to tag on that comment and add, this might be a great summer activity to look at keeping students engaged through the summer, where they're not in conflict with other school and academic, as well as sports. So, and that would really tie into a lot of our city's youth commission activities, I would imagine. Our city kind of goes dormant in the summer for our youth commission, but this might be an interesting way to keep our young adults engaged and doing something over the summer months in our towns. That could be really a valuable summer experience.
Director Bruins?
So, thank you, Kelly. You know what, I'm going to ask you to start first. Can you give us a little bit of background about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, I recently just graduated from UC Santa Cruz. I majored as a combined major, actually, in environmental studies and economics. And this is my first job outside of college.
Cool.
So, yeah.
And how long are you with us for?
Until June.
Until June.
I bet you could run a program committee, couldn't you?
So yeah, I was kind of curious coming into this tonight to hear what the proposal was, and I definitely would like to look at how do we get to a yes. My concern also was around the timeline and trying to figure that out. So one of the questions I have for you is, did you have any discussions, did you visit any of the high schools, talk with them, and share your idea with them to see what they think in terms of how to successfully reach the kids, particularly if we're talking about high schoolers, while we're talking about them being in school? And this is that whole thing of whether, it's a generic thing, how do we reach them? Do we do it through clubs? Do we do it through, announcements? How do we do that? I also wanted to know whether or not, you considered looking at maybe being a summer activity. And I think, the idea of the youth commissions, because youth commissions, in this time frame, probably have that time, and having something handed to them that they get to, organize in their own communities, as an extension, and have it ready to go for the summer, which may not match your personal schedule, but maybe we need to extend this, no? But anyway, can you talk about whether or not you reached out to high schools and saying, what would it take for us to successfully connect with students?
Sure. So I definitely agree with you that for this year, the timeline is really tight, and we don't expect that many schools to sign up this year. But we are doing school outreach. We have made a comprehensive flyer for teachers to have in their classrooms, and we are going to reach out directly to the teachers that we think would best be fitted to do outreach. And so we do want to have like a direct line of communication with those teachers, and I'm also looking into robotics clubs that are in our service area. And to Rod Singh's point, a lot of them are massive, but some of them aren't, and those are the schools that, you know, are our best targets. I think for the first year are the schools that don't have as robust of teams that won't be as swamped.
Okay.
Well, I mean, actually what happens is the smaller the team, the more swamped they are, right? If they're competing to build a 120-pound bot for 2 competitions, if you have 80 or 100 kids, it's a lot easier than with 15, right, and mentors. But I will tell you that every one of these teams, come January 1st, you're not going to get their attention. And so, I mean, I think Courtney's idea of a summer program would actually, do it in summer, do it in fall, I think you'd end up with a much better result, because a lot of these teams are looking for off-season things to do. They have the shops, they have the tools, they have the, you know, the electronics, they know how to program Raspberry Pis and all the rest of it. And you know, tapping into that would be excellent.
I think you have 13 entries ready to go.
Oh, I do.
Let's go.
Yeah, no, I'll help you.
Los Altos Hills has got this.
Oh, no, Cupertino is going to wipe you out.
Okay, man, we start using our youth commissions. I can just see every youth commission. It's a competition, city to city. You want to go for it? Let's go for it.
And I just violate the Brown Act somehow.
So let's try to find a way to get to conclusion on this item. So let me start by seeing if any member of the public wishes to address us. Mr. Carney, please come forward.
Hi, thanks. I think this is a really exciting idea. I do think you deserve a budget that includes all of the costs. I think there's a tremendous amount of unknown cost if you're going to be donating bicycle frames and motors and batteries to an unknown number of high schools. There are probably 50 high schools in our service territory, 4 in Mountain View alone, for sure. So that would be helpful. And also think about what would happen to the bikes at the end of the contest. What could you do from a marketing perspective with 20 to 50 bicycles in your colors with your logo on them? And finally, I think the scholarship levels are far too low. I mean, even for an individual, these are not exciting numbers, and for a team that could have 4, 5, 6 people, it spreads the wealth too thinly. And I think when you see the full-on budget, you'll realize that you could raise the scholarship amounts and still not be raising the total cost of the program too much. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Carney?
I would simply observe that the way it works with FIRST is every team pays to come to the competition. They have to raise the money, typically 20, 30, 40,000 to compete during the season. So I don't think you have to provide a lot of incentive. A lot of high schools around here love to compete. And if, they're available and you've given them a good challenge and they recognize that, I think the idea is brilliant, and I don't think you have to seed it with a huge amount of money, but having a level playing field as regards the bikes, right? So everybody gets the same stock or something. I think that would make a lot of sense. And then they instrument them and they put the electronics on or something such.
I'd like to go back to Tony's comment. I was going to say the same thing. Specialized, they do certain things with the schools and such, and they still have a hard time reaching out and such. So maybe this is something that they would want to partner with us if we wanted to do that. And Rod, while I agree with a lot of what you're saying, in terms of the raising the money and all, those are clubs. Those are clubs within the schools and such. This is not a club that we're tapping into here, particularly not during that competition. And so I think it's a little bit different scenario. And so,
sure.
I said, right now, my gut tells me we probably get more success with this going through with our youth commissions and trying to lay all the groundwork, having
Sure.
Kelly work with and pulling all these together and facilitating a discussion with the chairs of these various groups and such to kind of look at how do we do this? What would it take to be successful? And I would also like to say that I think we should try and reach out to these kids and trying to get a good diversity of kids participating in this. But I think there's a lot of groundwork that could be laid out.
You bet. All I'm suggesting is that it may be enough financial incentive just to supply all, the materials, which will be considerable. If you had a budget of, $2,000 a team, and we were footing the bill for that, I'll bet you'd get a lot of takers, even if instead of allocating the money all to
Right.
awards, you'd allocate the money to materials. I'll bet you'd have a lot of interested high schoolers.
So I'm excited about this. I think, I think there might be some more details, and maybe, I guess I'm comfortable with being kind of flexible enough. You said you're going to reach out to teachers. I honestly, yes, it's been a while since my kids were in high school, but I just don't think things have changed. I think, the teachers are kind of focused on their curriculum and, their ability to be a champion to help make some of this, to do some of this. I honestly not sure we're going to be successful that direction, but I think there's time where you can start, really testing those ideas and such. But I'd like to see us move forward with one implementation or another to try and do something. I'm also open to the idea of partnering in terms of if we really think we want to have the level playing field and provide, bikes and all the equipment, or what we want to do there. I just think it's a really exciting opportunity, and I do also agree that what do we do? The winners. What do we do? Can we think and, and again, with the youth commissions, they could probably come up with brilliant ideas in terms of how to reassign that bike, to some child that might be, in need of something like that, who otherwise would not have a bike or something. So I'm excited, and I'd like to see us figure out how to move forward.
Director Craig.
Something.
Thank you. And I'm very excited about this project. Just doing a little bit of e-bike searching here, you could be looking at anywhere from $250 to $1,500 to build a bike. So this is definitely you could definitely have an arms race here. So I don't know if one of the things that I think is a good idea when you give everybody the exact same kit to start with is that you've leveled the playing field, and somebody can't go out there and just buy a championship bike on this deal here. I might have missed it, but what did you envision? Were people going to retrofit their bikes? Were they going to buy a kit, or were they going to just design something from scratch? Or, I mean, what was kind of your thinking on this?
Our thinking was to, give everyone the same materials. We've been playing around with not providing a base bike, and in that way, we could sort of give a price level that would be sort of the base price. And if they choose to go above that price, they would simply be deducted from the total score. However, that bike might perform better, but in that way, it'd be sort of a compromise. But if they get a junkyard bike, that would give them some, bonus points.
Okay.
When the Los Altos Hills go get their Tesla equivalent of bikes and use that as their base bikes.
I've already written my announcement for tomorrow night's meeting. Game on.
I brought up a number of scouts, and let me tell you, just watching the Pinewood Derby cars that came out of these things, they were turned by lathes at NASA and stuff like that. I mean, these things were flying. And then just since we're throwing out some ideas, I thought it would be kind of neat that somewhere in your budget, maybe you can dig up some money for a documentation crew to go out and actually get a little video from each one of the teams, and maybe get a little snippet of them talking about why they're excited about this, why they think that e-bikes are really going to be an impact, and kind of roll that all into, and then we have something long term, and it can be used as a promo for possibly next year to make something happen. So, I mean,
so I realize this is a fun project that everybody up here wants to start getting their hands dirty.
I mean, do we get to build a bike?
But I think we need to, so the board, we need to think about, we're providing good ideas, but we're not trying to design the program from the dais up here, right? So if we could get back to, do we want to allocate this kind of money? Do we want to actually allocate more money, as seems to be suggested? Do we not, I don't know, do we want to play around with a time frame? I think it's fairly simple, but I don't think we want to get into designing their program. Director Gibbons.
Thank you. So I was heading along that same line. I think this is a good example of a staff report that we might want fleshed out a little bit more. We had asked in the past on some of these, we really do want to see a financial summary from what budget the money's coming from and how much. So all this does is account for the what do you call it, the prize money. But I think the board would benefit from having a complete rundown of the full budget for the project. I think it's a great idea. I think you hit a home run, but we need to have more information for the board. And how much money, basically how much money we're going to have. And I do think the comment about what would happen with the end product. And another group, you might check out, foster children. There's a lot of groups, and scouting groups. There's a lot of broader range than just schools. So keep an eye on that. But we need a full budget, I think. Because the recommendation here is to approve the allocation of the scholarship money. I do think it's too low as well. So I'd like to make a motion that we ask staff to come back at the next meeting with a little flushed out idea. No?
Well, the timeline's already constrained.
See if she's got a second.
Yeah.
So do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second the motion. I think this is edgy. I think it's cool. I think the high school students that do want to participate will step up and they'll embrace it. I don't think it needs to be clubs. I think it can just be a bunch of people that like bike riding. And so I think sometimes we get into this as a committee. I think we get a little too involved in the details and we lose the focus of what the staff is trying to accomplish here. And just one comment, I think one of the ways these bikes could be used is at some of the community events and allowing the community members to go through the obstacle course or a small obstacle course or using it for direct marketing. So I'm going to second it, and I would even offer to host it in Gilroy.
I was going to can I give another thought? I know there's a motion, but let me give another thought to this. I don't know why, I agree, we are not the ones who should be designing this. I think there's been a lot of comments, a lot of feedback, and I trust that Kelly has heard some of our own ideas and our reservations or whatever. I don't know why tonight we can't just say a not to exceed dollar value, and it's up to Kelly and the staff to figure out how, when, why, how they're going to spend that money, what's going to go into buying kits, what's going to be going into prize money, and so that would be the preference that I would have. I'm not sure I don't think I want it to come back.
Yeah, so I would just add my 2 cents that I would vote no on the motion because I don't think we need to micromanage everything that goes on. I don't think it needs to be fleshed out more. I'd like to see us approve it tonight in some way. Other comments?
So,
Director Abe-Koga?
While you're doing that, could staff kind of do the back of the envelope in terms of, you said you were doing this out of our marketing budget. If we look at kind of a total package tonight, what would you kind of be looking at? So if you can think about those numbers as we're still making comments.
I mean, we did estimate that it would cost $1,000 per team. That's inclusive of the materials as well as a stipend for the educators who are volunteering extra time to coach these teams. So that was our cost per team, and that's really variable based on how many teams we would have. And so that could be 13,000, or it could be more, or it could be less. And this is the first year we're doing this, so we really expected that we can start small and hope to build on that success through our partners and through marketing the event. And so in future years, we can grow from there.
Okay, Director Abe-Koga?
I agree. I think we could just set a budget tonight and have them work out the details. So I maybe suggest something like $25,000.
The money we just saved on the facilitator.
Yes, perfect. And I was going to ask, with our advisory group in the future, could something like this go to them and they can help work out all the details? It seems like this is a great program, and that's what our advisory group is going to be tasked to do. So that should be the sounding board for these types of ideas is my thought. But if you want me to, I can make a motion.
I currently have a motion on the floor.
Okay, sorry.
We have a motion and a second on the floor.
Director Gibbons, would you like to?
You had a comment. You have a second. Okay. So just to be clear, my comment was based on procedure. We have asked staff in the past when they come forward with programs that require money that we have a more comprehensive budget. So that's the basis of my comment. I'm amenable to setting a budget, but I think we have to be realistic. I think $1,000 is too low per faculty and everything else, but assuming that that's what staff wants, then they should set a maximum number of teams. There will be no more than 15 teams. We can set out $15,000 for that. We can set out $10,000 for the scholarships, whatever it is, and we can set out another $10,000 for whatever else will be required. So we're talking about $35,000. I would be willing to amend my motion to say a budget not to exceed $35,000. Would you be amenable to that?
Yes, that would be.
Okay, so now your motion says come back with a fleshed out plan with a budget.
No, I have revised the motion to say that we approve the staff recommendation for this project, but alter the budget to a not to exceed $35,000 with the details to be worked out by staff.
Do you agree to that
Yes.
clarification? Okay. Other comments then?
I would just like to give staff flexibility to also revise the schedule and/or implementation details, and not be fixed to deciding that all this money should go to awards, right? So I think if the motion is to give staff the flexibility to decide how to spend that 35 and whatever the timing they deem best after consulting with youth commissions and schools and probable participants, I think I would like to see us
I think that
not
was
lock in the presentation tonight, but give them a chance to rev.
Yeah, as the motion was made, I think it was implicit that staff is getting the opportunity to scope the project with that budget.
Okay.
So it's basically moving forward with not but a Bike to the Future themed event here with a budget not to exceed $35,000 and probably done in 2018.
I wouldn't add the latter.
Let's vote.
Okay, so you agree with adding all but the latter?
Yes.
Okay, so any further comment? Can I call the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Seeing none, that one's concluded.
I'm not opposed, but
Go ahead, Director Yulo.
if I can carry Director Gibbons' water for a moment here, I do think that it would have been much better to have a complete staff report to start with. And we appreciate the enthusiasm, but part of bringing on new people is teaching them how to prepare staff reports so that the board gets a full hearing on what's considered. So I appreciate your flexibility there, Director Gibbons.
Okay.
As long as it's held in Campbell.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe on the Campbell-Los Gatos border, the North 40.
To add challenge, we're doing it in the hills, aren't we, Courtney?
I just want Kelly to walk away understanding that not only did you get what you asked for, but you tripled it. So congratulations. That's pretty unheard of at a council meeting.
And it all came from that facilitator.
Okay. Let's try to get back focused here. So item number 6 is executive committee report. The executive committee did not meet, so there's nothing to report. Would any member of the public wish to address us on the non-report? No. Seeing none coming forward, I will close the public testimony. And would any members of the board wish to comment on this non-report? Seeing none, I'm going to close this item, move on from item number 6. And we're on number 8, which is budget for decarbonization of existing power contracts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Which is a discussion item.
Yeah, this is a discussion item and just basically an update of where we stand with the decarbonization of our current power supply contracts.
Is that biomass on your head?
Happy holidays to the board. I'm wearing this hat as my item is not as interesting or exciting as the prior one. Hopefully it'll keep your attention. So what we wanted to bring up for discussion tonight was we had an effort that was started by staff after our October workshop where we discussed the upcoming legislation that's going to put carbon intensity on our power sourcing. And as part of that, there's a conflict between the term carbon-free and renewable energy. And as part of what was identified as part of that workshop was that we have several existing power supply contracts where the supplier has the option on how they fulfill their renewable energy obligations, whereby they could conceivably supply those carbon emitting or non-carbon free renewable power as part of that. So what we have here in our staff report is sort of the volumes and the percentages of those supply contracts that we have over the next 4 years. So just to orient you to the table, if we look at 2018, we have contracted for over 1,500 gigawatt hours of power from suppliers who have the option on how to fulfill that obligation, or 37% of our load, and that is inclusive of Milpitas, which might need to be revised with the latest resolution here. But I do want to point out that the supplier could conceivably fulfill their full obligation with carbon-free renewable energy or 100% carbon renewable energy. We don't really have that control as the buyer, but we did start reaching out to our suppliers to see if we could get some commitment from them to not supply the non-carbon free renewable energy. And just want to give you an update. We have 3 suppliers who have agreed to do it at no additional cost. We have one supplier who was requesting some additional funds in order to accomplish that, and we still have some ongoing discussions with a few other suppliers. I think as a point of perspective, I do want to also point out the relative cost of the different renewables. It's something that is pertinent to the fact that we're not very likely to get biomass as part of our deliveries, because the actual cost of biomass is more expensive than solar or wind at the moment. I pulled some from a recent report. The average cost of wind and biomass is in the $20 to $35 per megawatt range, whereas biomass is in the $60 per megawatt range, which basically means that our suppliers are more than likely going to supply from wind and solar. And in fact, the supplier who did request some additional funds, the volumes they've delivered for 2017 obligation has been 100% wind and solar. They still have some additional volumes to deliver, but it has been all wind and solar. So we wanted to ask the board for a little direction on whether we have an appetite to seek certainty from this one supplier who is asking for some additional money or not, to get certainty that they would not supply any carbon renewable energy, carbon emitting renewable energy. Thank you.
Okay, so questions from the board. I'll start off. If we were to pay the supplier for the certainty, what kind of precedent do you think that might set for next time we go out for bidding on these?
In my opinion, it sets a bad precedent. I think for future contracting, though, we will be making it explicit that the renewable power needs to be carbon free for any future contracts we negotiate. But for this instance, I believe it would give the incentive for the other suppliers to maybe ask for more money as well.
Okay, Director Yulo?
Chair Rennie, if your indication, the answer to your question was any indication, I really strongly believe we don't want to do anything right now, but just to sit on the sidelines and let staff continue with this process and evaluating our current power resources and efforts to decarbonize them.
Okay, so let me see if there any members of the public wish to. Okay, go ahead, Director Gibbons.
So correct me. When we had an executive committee meeting, you did a very good presentation on how much carbon emitting we have per kilowatt hour. I'm not sure the whole board has seen that presentation. And I'm going to pick numbers from my memory, but please feel free. PG&E's typical carbon output for a kilowatt hour is like 1,500.
I'm going to maybe defer to Dawn.
Okay.
Do you have those numbers?
And what it's and you can provide the information to the board rather than spend time tonight. But and then what we were doing, even with the biomass, was 14?
It was like
15?
14.
Yeah, it was 14 of,
Versus 1,500.
that,
So-
14, yeah, versus 400 for PG&E, and I think
National
1,500
average
for
was
the
like
state.
1,500.
Right, the national average was about 1,000 to 1,100. We'd be at about 14.
Okay.
And PG&E is in the 400 range.
Okay, so just to reinforce Director Ullo's comment, they're really, I mean, it's a nice thing for us to move forward to and do our future contracts to, but the urgency of putting ourselves in an awkward negotiating position didn't seem to be there, given the presentation.
Okay. So would any members of the public wish to address us on this item? See nobody coming forward, I'll close the public testimony, and I will just add my 2 cents that I'm also not really in favor of paying for this. I'm worried about the precedent on it. Director Sinks?
Yeah, and I think a key thing that we heard, Risk Committee and otherwise, right, and tonight that you've reinforced is biomass actually goes at a higher price than wind and solar. That means that although somebody might like us to pay a premium because we've asked, honestly, they could sell the biomass that they would have the option of selling to us and sell us wind and solar instead and make money in that exchange. So it seems to me that, I mean, it doesn't make sense to, I mean, it may be that facts change and over time we'll hear about it, but yeah, I'm not in favor of hindering our negotiating position nor setting a precedent.
Okay, other comments? So we don't actually need a motion or anything on that?
Just discussion.
So I would, anything else from staff on this? No, so I'll go ahead and close this item. So that was item number 8 we're finished with. So item number 9 is a community engagement recap discussion.
And I believe Pam's doing the presentation.
Good evening again. My hat does not top Dennis's. He takes the win on that. So I just wanted to do a quick recap of the tremendous effort that the marketing and outreach team put forth this year in really doing our best possible everything in the book to reach our customers and let them know that we're here, the benefit we're bringing to the community, that this wasn't meant to be a surprise to anyone because we really, really did put a lot of effort into this. So looking at events and presentations, a majority of these tabling events were done by interns, Climate Corps fellows. Paige Wenzel was our Climate Corps fellow that we were very lucky to inherit from Cupertino last December as we were ramping up the notification process, and was so tremendously helpful that that's why we ended up getting 2 other fellows this year. And other volunteers. We did find that there are a lot of advocates in the community who feel really strongly and passionate about what we're doing, so they volunteered to table at some of these events as well. So the member community presentations, those are hosted with the cities, so we did town halls. Thanks again to all of you who participated in those. We did multiple in most committees, or most communities, and that also includes other subcommittees or environmental commissions or senior center presentations. And then we had about 10 presentations that were hosted by service clubs and other community-based organizations, and the other presentations are explained there, or participation in community events. And here's just some highlights, a little reminiscing through the year of one of many Earth Day events. Excuse me. Just flicking through. This was a fun one when we participated in the EV rally by the Electric Auto Association of Silicon Valley during National Drive Electric Week, and we were given some home EV chargers that we raffled to some very excited customers. They just so happened to have just bought a Chevy Volt a month prior and were Green Prime customers, and so they won the lucky draw. So just looking at our earned media, going through all the various tools that were in our toolbox for outreach, we had over 40 articles that were in print and online from various news publications locally or even nationally. We did get 7 broadcast coverage. A lot of that was from our media event for our launch event back in April. And we had 5 radio stories on KQED and KCBS. And here's some of the headlines from our local papers. Our social media engagement has also seen a steady increase in followers, but the thing I would like to highlight with our social media is the engagement. So more than looking at numbers of followers, it's how people are actually engaging with us. And you can see here, I know the numbers are kind of small, but these are massive. So we are seeing, on average, maybe around somewhere between 50,000 impressions on Twitter. We're in the high thousands each month on Facebook, and the Twitter, the massive 1 million impressions reached, that was because of the media coverage from our launch event in April. So those are really impressive numbers of engagement. I mean, a lot of that is from our partnerships and your communities sharing the information. So although we may be brand new and the numbers don't look so high, it's the quality of the relationships we've developed and how people are sharing information. For example, the CPAG application, the Morgan Hill Downtown Association and Chamber of Commerce shared that, and that really it really helped spread a lot of what we're doing. And all of your PIOs have been really wonderful to work with and have really helped in these outreach efforts throughout the year. We also ran an ad campaign, so to try to reach everyone. We did print and online in our main languages, so English, Spanish, and Chinese. We ran about several months, so pretty much throughout our whole enrollment period, in all local community papers. And then our online ads were geo-targeted to really try and make sure we were reaching folks within our service area, since our media market kind of includes some cities that are not participating, like Santa Clara and San Jose. So here's just a look at some of our campaign creative that we've shared with you previously. And we also did some social media paid promotions as well. Our website also saw an incredible amount of traffic. I don't know, for those of you who managed your own websites, these are very impressive numbers. We've reached, just looking at the unique users of nearly 83,000, that's a third of our customers who visited our website. So tremendous utilization of that resource, and you can also see that the trend, of course, gravitated towards the increase in enrollment notifications over the summer. So looking forward into 2018, some stuff that we're doing currently is part of our strategic plan was that we would value the team bonding experience among staff as well as giving back to the community by donating our time. And so we are partnering with an organization called Peninsula Food Runners. They pick up leftover food from the tech companies within our service area that feed their employees and have a lot of leftovers, and then deliver it to homeless shelters. And so we are picking up from some of our large tech customers in our service area and delivering it carbon-free in our leaf, and it's going to the Sunnyvale Cold Shelter. And we'll continue to look at opportunities to give back to the community with our staff time. It's not too much time, but it's what we can do. We're also been really taking a lead, so not only on the regulatory side in our participation with SVCEA, but also with the marketing subcommittee. So we volunteered our duo of Kevin interns that we had earlier this summer to start this process. They really led the project, volunteering, because SVCEA just recently has one staff member, so it's really just been a volunteer effort. And Kelly and Victoria, our other Climate Corps fellow who's been taking photos tonight, they've also helped see this project through, and announcing that just today went live, this project that started in June, the new SVCEA website, which is really meant to show the collective impact of community choice in California. The previous site was very slim, lacking, and so we think with these regulatory battles facing us, we really needed to have this tool as a resource to educate people as to what we're doing. And so it was a benefit for us, especially speaking with our commercial customers and other folks that wanted to see some other third-party collaboration. So that was an excellent tool that we're excited to announce is live today. And we'll continue to do outreach with our fellows, with volunteers. We've had a lot of folks reach out to us wanting to just share the word in their community. We're already getting solicitations to participate in your various Earth Day festivals in April, and that ongoing outreach and communication to our community will continue to be a very important tool. And then, of course, when activity once we know for sure timing with Milpitas, enrollment despite the enrollment, the outreach for Milpitas has already started. We participated last night in a Bay Area Regional Energy Network home energy upgrade workshop in Milpitas, where we actually, there was 100 people there, and they said, wow, this is great. I've actually already heard about this because of just the crossover and all the outreach we did throughout this year. So we'll continue to participate in those energy upgrade partnerships and other county programs where we can partner on their sustainability initiatives, along with the programs that you're all doing as we coordinate with our member agency working group. And then, of course, our Bike to the Future campaign, which we're excited about. So thank you. That is our year in review.
Any questions from board members? Would any member of the public wish to address us on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public testimony. Director Yulo.
I heard either today or yesterday on the KQAD that millennials, I'm not sure if it was all millennials or just 20-somethings, but on average spend 3.5 hours a day watching video. And so I don't know if our business really lends itself to video so much. I don't know, is there cute cats saving energy or something? I'm not really sure. But what are your thoughts on doing more video? I noticed most of your stats were not related to video.
Right, so I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention it, and it was unfortunately not ready for this evening, but so for all of you flipping through your Facebook news feeds, have you seen those tasty videos where it's like quickly assembling food and it's awesome looking? So that's like now a $1 billion industry, is these like quick food videos, and so they're very, very popular. So we're doing a play on that with our Understanding Your Bill video. So that's sort of been the next communications challenge that we've been continuously working on since the fall, is helping folks understand their bill. So despite having a calculator, a worksheet, a walkthrough guide, jumping in on Nextdoor and saying, read these resources, folks are busy and they consume media in a variety of ways. Video is definitely being an important aspect of that. So this video should be wrapped up very soon, and we can email a link to share it with all of you. But yeah, video is definitely important.
Other questions, comments from the board? Okay, well, so seeing none, thank you for your report. Very, very exciting, very good stuff. So it brings us to the end of our regular calendar. Would any board members like to make announcements or comments about future agenda items?
I have one thing.
Okay, Director Sinks.
And I guess I could have covered under the CEO report. Last time we mentioned that we had commissioned an investigation by Richard Watson and Gershon
That's the same
regarding
firm
one of
that's
our
correct.
suppliers. Do we have a status on that investigation? Do we know when this is coming back to the board?
Yeah. We'll have a report to the board in your meeting in January, so we're just about wrapping up our review.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Director Bruins.
Yeah, we whizzed by one of the items in the consent calendar, and I just want to take a moment and acknowledge and applaud staff. And that was with the item 1G about the IT security audit and the staff's responsiveness to the first audit and the rapid turnaround on a second audit and all. I just think that was really noteworthy, and I wanted to say thank you very much on that. And then the other thing is, in light of that one, the situation that was just raised and all, do we have any policy or practice in terms of who does talk to the media? It's one thing when we have media things, but we are making press releases and we're initiating it. It's quite another when we get a cold call or something. So, and I'm not asking, just do we have something in place, or do we need to put something
That's
in
great
place?
timing for that. We met this morning as a staff to decide that, and Pam Leonard would be the designated person to handle media calls, and any public records requests would flow through Andrea. So we set that internal policy this morning.
Okay, and I would also ask that we do consider coaching or giving guidance to us as board members as well. Various agencies have different ways of handling these things, because I think and I think we should kind of be looking at that. And then I'm also I think I did get confirmation in terms of our way of redacting information on our documents on the website. That has been resolved as well.
That is correct. Yeah.
And again, thank you guys for being very responsive in looking at those things. I appreciate it. So that's all I wanted to say was thank you.
Okay, other comments from board members? Okay, well, seeing none, then one more thing from staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe Don Bray has a quick announcement.
Okay, we had a light note to wind up on here. Several of us with connections to MCE yesterday received a nice little electronic season's greetings card, and it had a little, warm message about clean energy and stuff on it. And so at a marketing and accounts meeting we had today at lunch, we're like, or right before lunch, we're like, we should have something like that we can send out to our key contacts and customers, a nice seasonal message. And we didn't talk about it a whole lot. We're like, what should we do? And somebody said, well, we could do a riff on the night before Christmas. And then Peyton Parks over here, one of our account managers, said, well, I'll work on that. And I'm not joking. At 1:15 this afternoon in our queue was the night before Christmas, crafted in and around SVCE, and it was so good and done so quickly that we've discovered a new talent. I mean, normally he's like neck deep in spreadsheets. He had a big role to play in which you saw earlier on rates. But yeah, he should have been a writer. Anyway, we'd like to have him read this. It's kind of a nice.
Okay.
But wait a minute, to do this, do you have to borrow somebody's hat?
Yes. Preferably Dennis's.
How does it look? All right.
You can come up if you want to get a picture from the front. It's okay.
Should I smile first before I read?
Makeup.
No pressure. Never before performed before a live audience.
All right. Now that it's built up, let's see if I can deliver. 'Twas a frosty December, and all through our valley, electrons were buzzing, the cleanest in Cali. Turbines were turning through blustery nights, blades through the air just like butter would slice. Torrents cascaded through spillways and dams, make power from water a marvelous plan. Then as the sun rose and it crept to its peak, our panels for solar stood glinting and chic. The wattage converged on the lines and the cables and raced to be first at our holiday tables. It lit up the places where families gather, it cooked up a feast, and it baked cookie batter. Natural gas, there was simply no need. We converted the house to electric for heat. Like magic it summoned, one flick of the switch, and it kept us all warm without sweaters that itch. But old Uncle Joe didn't see the advantage. You use all this power, you're killing the planet. I replied, Uncle Joe, I do beg your pardon, but our sources of power are absent of carbon. On blenders, on mixers, on cooktops and stoves. More music, more parties, less holiday woes. SVCE staff sends their wintertime best with clean generation for 1% less.
Wow.
Thank you.
You lived up to it. That was
Sounds good.
Thank you, guys.
Very, very good.
So is this going, are we putting this out on social media and sending it all out to everybody? Oh, we should. We've got to.